They were both there at the end. When the barrier fell and the world was remade, Sciel stood in the crowd with the weight of every harvest and every loss she'd ever known. Lune stood beside her, carrying the legacy of parents who believed only in results, a lifetime of questions, and the burden of every expedition that never returned. While the Paintress wept at the base of the monolith, they were the ones who steadied the line and helped choose what would come next. And when the final choices were made about what to save, who to bring back, and what it means to keep going, no one shaped the outcome more than these two. My name is Vigil, and this is Video Game Lore. Today, we are tracing the journeys of Sciel and Lune, two of the most enduring, quietly complex figures in the world of Clair Obscur, Expedition 33. Before we go further, it is important to be clear about something. The story of Sciel and Lune is not handed to you directly. It lives in the spaces between things, writings left behind by those lost to the gamage, in the fields and ruins and conversations you can only piece together if you're paying attention. Most of what follows comes straight from the game's main story. Some of it is drawn from environmental storytelling, dialogue, and the way the world itself remembers. And some of it, where the lore is silent, comes from careful speculation and interpretation. I will always tell you that, because these are characters who deserve to have their stories told through careful analysis. They are survivors. They are architects of hope and grief, of memory and endurance. They carry the consequences of every choice, sometimes quietly, always completely. And by the time we're finished, you'll understand why the fate of Lumiere and the world beyond was shaped just as much by their hands and by any legend written in the monolith. This is the story of Sciel and Lune. Let's begin. Sciel and Lune were both born in the year known as Monolith Year 65. Sciel's destiny would draw her to the vital craft of farming as soon as she reached maturity. Throughout her youth, she experienced fear, anxiety, and happiness, emotions that would sometimes overwhelm her. In those moments, her father would lead her out beneath the night sky, where he imparted to her the tradition of confiding in the stars. By entrusting her feelings to the celestial void, she believed the stars would hear her and understand her heart. Little else is recorded regarding the precise nature of Sciel's upbringing or the specific methods and crops she tended in her formative years. Lune, by contrast, endured a childhood marked by hardship and the crushing weight of expectations that could never be met. Her parents were researchers, consumed by obsession, and they imposed their relentless standards upon her. Her mother, Brigitte, is named. Her father's name is not mentioned in the lore. Even as a child, Lune was set apart. She began her apprenticeship with her parents at the age of 4, 2 years before the customary age of 6. In Lune's own mind, this made her the obvious choice to her parents as a research assistant, more convenient than seeking one who would leave at night and return to their own home. Her parents instilled in her an unyielding creed. There are no points for effort, only results. Lune was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her older sister Stella was fiery of spirit, fiercely independent, and gifted with artistic talent. It was she who gave the family dog its name Pat, meaning paw. Stella lived free from the burdens of responsibility that weighed upon Lune. Her eldest sibling, a brother, Sol, completed the trio, and Lune always believed he was regarded as the favorite child. Yet she bore them no bitterness. In fact, she considered Sol to be an exemplary brother, and held no ill will towards either sibling. From an early age, Lune was pressed into service, assisting her parents in their ceaseless quest to unraveling the mysteries of the Paintress and the enigmatic world they inhabited. In the rare fragments of time she could call her own, Lune devoted herself to her true passion, playing the guitar. The years passed in unchanging rhythm. She split her days between laboring in her parents' research, practicing music, spending fleeting moments with Stella and Sol, and attending the dinners her parents hosted for friends such as Gustave and Amelie. Meanwhile, Sciel's own journey continued in quiet persistence. She grew into her role as a farmer, her knowledge of plants and crops ever expanding, and she became adept in the use of the double-ended scythe, a tool demanding both strength and skill. All of this would be swept away by the tide of fate in Monolith Year 46, when the world of both Sciel and Lune was forever altered. The appointed hour had arrived, and the harbor became a gathering place for hundreds. All assembled to witness the Paintress commence the gamage. Amidst the throng, Lune and Sciel found themselves swept up by the city's festivities, their paths converging in the crowded streets as the day gave way to dusk. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a hush fell, and every gaze was drawn upward. Lune and Sciel, now 19 years old, stood with their parents, watching as the Paintress emerged to enact her solemn duty, changing the count from 47 to 46. With the gamage's beginning, the loss of loved ones was renewed, and the ranks of orphans grew ever larger. Sciel and her parents withdrew from the harbor, returning home in the wake of the ceremony, while Lune steeled herself to bid farewell to her own family. Though both sets of parents were fated to gamage the following year, Lune's parents had resolved to fulfill the purpose for which they had been preparing all their lives. They chose to embark on a final quest to challenge the Paintress directly, joining the ranks of Expedition 46. In the hours that remained, Sol, Lune, and Stella clung to their parents, cherishing the fleeting moments before the inevitable parting. When morning came, the time for departure could no longer be denied. Their parents boarded the ships that would bear them across the sea, turning to wave goodbye, no doubt their eyes lingering on Lune, a silent acknowledgement that she was entrusted with the legacy that they would leave behind. The months passed in a heavy silence. Sciel and her family persevered in their labors upon the farm, tending to their fields and crops as the year waned. Lune, meanwhile, threw herself into the continuation of her parents' research, carrying forward the torch of their ambition. Though no expedition had returned since the ill-fated Expedition 84, a fragile hope endured within her heart, a belief that her parents had triumphed against the Paintress, or accomplished the impossible by halting the gamage. At last, the year's end arrived. Lune and her siblings gathered at the harbor, their spirits suspended between hope and dread, longing for a miracle. Sciel was present as well, accompanied by her mother and father, each adorned with a red and white flower wreath, a customary symbol bestowed upon those who would soon face the gamage. A breathless anticipation gripped the crowd as the Paintress emerged once more. With unyielding finality, she reduced the number from 46 to 45. In that instant, all who had reached the age of 45 or beyond were erased, reduced to nothing but dust and drifting petals. The air grew thick with the torrent of crimson petals, and Sciel, overwhelmed by the storm of loss, fled into the streets. She made her way in haste to the hidden room atop the crooked tower. Lune, struck by the crushing realization of her parents' fate and the shattering of her last hopes, was left reeling. Her brother surely tried to offer comfort, but Lune broke away, driven by anguish toward the same crooked tower. Upon arrival, Lune was met with surprise. She was not alone. Sciel, too, had sought refuge in this secret place. Their eyes met, each recognizing the pain mirrored in the other. Though they were strangers, they were united in grief, bound by a loss that needed no words. For hours they remained there, sharing their stories, offering solace, and striving to help one another endure. With the coming of the next day, Lune forged a new resolve. She pledged to dedicate her life to the pursuit left unfinished by her parents, to defeat the Paintress and unravel the deepest mysteries of their world. In service of this mission, Lune resolved to cast aside all distractions, severing ties with nearly everyone around her, lest they deter her from her chosen path. In so doing, she also distanced herself from Sciel, the one soul with whom she had found comfort in her darkest hour. Thus, the two parted ways, each embarking on a separate journey, their lives forever marked by the events of the gamage. The Lord doesn't tell us the exact moment, but it is certain that Sol, ever perceptive to his sister's untappable potential, recognized that Lune's gifts were meant for more than what her current path allowed. Acting upon this insight, he introduced her to Gustave, a renowned engineer at the Expedition Academy, whose reputation for innovation was known throughout Lumiere. Now well into her 20s, Lune agreed to the meeting, a decision that would become a turning point in her life. From that day forward, her destiny would be intertwined with Gustave's vision. Together, they embarked on a relentless pursuit of progress, channeling their combined intellect and ambition into the advancement of the Shield Dome, a crucial defense for their city. Their work stretched further, touching not only Lumiere's present, but also the future of every expedition yet to come. Among their most ambitious endeavors was the inception of Gustave's Lumina Converter, a project that would promise to shape the fate of the city and its people. Life at the Expeditionary Academy was not solely dedicated to invention. It also demanded resilience and preparedness. The growing threat of the Nevrons, ever lurking beyond the safety of the dome, required that all who served be able to defend themselves. Lune rose to this challenge with determination, mastering the art of drawing elemental energy, chroma, from her surroundings. Through discipline and study, she became an elemental artist, gradually unlocking the power to command the forces of fire, ice, lightning, earth, light, and darkness through the use of elemental stains. Her commitment to mastery was etched into her very skin. Lune adorned her arms and legs with pictos, intricate tattoos that acted as conduits for the elemental chroma she wielded. These markings were more than ornamentation. They transformed her body into a living instrument of magic, enabling her to channel powerful attacks and to defy gravity itself, hovering above the battlefield. With each passing year, her prowess deepened, and she became an increasingly formidable force. Her presence alone, a testament to her journey through hardship and discipline. While Lune's path led her into the arcane and the technological, Sciel's reputation as a skilled farmer continued to grow. Her expertise did not go unnoticed. Gustave, now working alongside Sophie, approached Sciel with an invitation to contribute to a new and vital enterprise. The city's limited farmland had long posed a challenge, and Gustave's latest aqua farm was designed to address this need. Sophie was placed in charge, and Sciel was asked to lend her knowledge and intuition to the project. Sciel recognized in this invitation an opportunity to effect true change. She accepted, and the years that followed saw her working side by side with Sophie, Gustave, and the dedicated aqua farmers of Aqua Farm 3. Their innovative approach, combined with the ancient wisdom of cultivation with advanced aquaponics, harnessing the waste of fish to feed crops, which in turn purified the water, creating a cycle of abundance where both protein and vegetables could be produced from the same limited space. Their stewardship extended to the floating pens along the island's coast, where ecosystems were carefully balanced. Fish in the central cages, kelp and mussels at the periphery to absorb excess nutrients and maintain the purity of the harbor. Chroma harvested from the sea was likely employed to automate filtration and accelerate the growth cycles that sustain the city's people with an abundance of fish and vegetables. The result of these efforts was immediate and profound. Whole neighborhoods were fed, and the city flourished. Yet, around Monolith Year 42, a new chapter began for Sciel, one marked by a profound change. The Outdome teams, responsible for gathering resources from nearby islands, returned to port. Sciel, ever resourceful, approached them in search of honey petal samples. It was here that she encountered Pierre, a man whose presence would alter the course of her life. He responded to her request with generosity, returning not only with a bouquet of honey petals, but with 15 boxes of plant cuttings, an offering that spoke of thoughtfulness and intention. What began as a simple exchange blossomed quickly into a deep and abiding love. Sciel and Pierre became inseparable, united by the knowledge that their time together was finite, destined to last only 5 years. They chose to marry, determined to make the most of every remaining moment, forging a bond that was as fierce as it was fleeting. Yet, fate is often cruel to those who cherish hope. Tragedy struck without warning, casting Sciel into a darkness from which escape would prove difficult. The promise of happiness was shattered, and she was left to navigate the aftermath with only the memory of love and the shadow of loss as her companions. Then, roughly 2 years later, in the fateful Monolith Year 39, Pierre departed with the Outdome teams on an expedition to one of the nearby islands. The in-game lore remains silent on the exact circumstances, but it is known that disaster struck. There was an accident, and Pierre's body was claimed by the sea, lost to the depths and never to be recovered. When word of her husband's death reached Sciel, the impact was devastating. Her heart was shattered, disbelief mingling with an agony that hollowed her very existence. The world around her became a landscape of absence. The hollow in his chair where he once sat, the emptiness of his shoes lined up at the door, the silent, unfilled shape of his jacket. Each reminder of what once was became a wound that would not close. Unable to endure the profound absence of her beloved or summon the will to continue, Sciel was overcome by despair. In her anguish, she chose to surrender herself to the same waters that had taken Pierre. She descended to the harbor, entered the ocean, and swam with relentless determination, driven by a desperate hope that she might rejoin him in another life. Her cries echoed across the waves, carrying her pain far beyond the shore. Her suffering did not go unnoticed. Sciel, vigilant and swift, heard her distant cries. He soared to her side, and upon arrival, beheld Sciel as she ceased to struggle, her form slipping beneath the surface, surrendering to the sea's cold embrace. Without hesitation, Sciel plunged into the water, retrieving her from the depths and bearing her back to the docks of Lumiere, her life barely preserved. Sciel regained consciousness in the following day, finding herself in the unfamiliar sterility of a hospital, unable to comprehend how she returned to the city. The physicians tended to her, conducting their tests and administering care, but it was here that she received another cruel blow. Unbeknownst to her, she had been carrying Pierre's child. The ordeal in the ocean, the seawater that had filled her lungs and body, had claimed the child's life as well. The magnitude of her loss deepened immeasurably. She had lost not only her husband, but the promise of their future together. In the weeks that followed, Sciel's struggle to endure was immense. Grief threatened to consume her, but Sophie and Gustave refused to abandon her to despair. Through steadfast presence and gentle support, they helped guide her through the darkness that threatened to swallow her completely. From this crucible of loss and suffering, Sciel emerged changed. She resolved to reshape her life and redefine her purpose. Pierre had once volunteered at the local school, imparting his knowledge of sailing and survival to the city's children. In his memory and honor, Sciel chose to leave the aqua farm behind and pick up his mantle as a teacher. She found solace in the stories the students shared about Pierre, allowing their words to kindle new joy within her. She discovered delight in unexpected places. Dancing became a source of happiness, and her spirit, once subdued, grew more adventurous and boldly flirtatious. This transformation led her to join the Expedition Academy, where she pursued new forms of mastery. Sciel learned to channel her chroma for combat, developing a fearsome proficiency. She became adept with mystical cards, imbued with the power of the sun and moon, weapons that could forecast an enemy's fate in battle. By using these cards in intricate, conjunctive stacks, she could enter a twilight state, unleashing devastating attacks, while simultaneously lending powerful support to her allies. Her primary weapon became the double-ended scythe, all of which was a symbol of her journey and evolution. Her fighting style, honed from her origins as a farmer and teacher, and shaped by her profound encounters with loss, reflected her new outlook. A vision of life and death not as opposites, but as inevitable companions in the greater cycle. 5 more years slipped away, and at last, the final day of Monolith Year 34 arrived. The day of the Gamage. A day marked both by anticipation and dread. Sciel and Lune each spent their final hours in Lumiere, immersed in the pursuits that had come to define them and brought them solace in a world so often shaped by loss. Lune, seeking solace in melody, took her place upon a stage set beside a statue in front of a bustling restaurant. There, with her guitar in hand, she played for a gathered crowd, her music weaving through the evening air. The notes, born from her heart, ripped through the assembly, carrying her and those who listened into a trance of memory and hope, a fleeting escape from the shadow of the Gamage. Elsewhere, Sciel spent her last moments with her students. The bonds of teacher and pupil rendered all the more poignant in the face of impending farewell. Her students, wishing to honor her legacy, presented her with several bracelets, a tangible remembrance of the lives she had touched and shaped. She expressed her gratitude, then donned her dance attire and made her way to the harbor, preparing for her final performance. As dusk deepened, Sciel joined the others on stage by the water's edge. Before a vast crowd, they transformed their bodies into living canvases, adorned with pictos and radiant with chroma, orchestrating a magical spectacle of light and movement. The performance was both a celebration and a lament, a final burst of beauty before the darkness descended. With the last rays of the sun fading, the city's festivities drew to a close. An expectant silence settled over the harbor as all eyes turned to the monolith, every soul waiting with bated breath to see if Expedition 34 had triumphed, if the Gamage might finally be halted. But hope was soon eclipsed by fate. The sky grew dark, and the Paintress rose in solemn ceremony. With a single gesture, she erased the number 34 and inscribed 33 upon the monolith, sealing the city's fate for another year. A wave of stillness swept through the crowd as the inevitable began. Hundreds of souls succumbed to the Gamage, fading from existence as their mortal forms dissolved into a swirling cloud of dust and drifting petals, rising above Lumiere like a mournful shroud. Sciel watched with somber resignation, her gaze lingering on the loss of her dear friend Sophie, bidding a silent farewell as the city mourned. Night descended, and the farewell festivities for Expedition 33 commenced. Sciel, her spirit heavy, lingered at a table, steadily emptying what seemed to be her 10th bottle of wine, a testament to the weight she carried. Gustave approached, noting the bottles, and in a moment of camaraderie, joined her in raising a toast to Sophie's memory. The specter of loss mingled with the fleeting comfort of shared remembrance, and Sciel, ever defiant of tomorrow's burdens, declared that she would not set out across the ocean sober. Gustave, recognizing the deeper meaning behind her words, respected her resolve, leaving her to her vigil and encouraging her to find what joy she could in the present. Elsewhere, Lune sat apart, her mind fixed on her research. Surrounded by old journals and meticulous notes, she pored over calculations and theories, her thoughts consumed by the mysteries of the expeditions and the unknown continent. Gustave, ever supported, interrupted her work to commend her for deducing the landing site of Expedition Zero, an expedition that, despite the passage of 67 years and a world transformed, remained the only one from which survivors had returned. Though Lune dismissed her findings as a mere speculation, Gustave expressed his unwavering trust in her reasoning and the soundness of her strategy. Yet even as she grappled with the odds, her doubts threatened to overwhelm her, until Gustave's light-hearted encouragement drew a reluctant laugh, momentarily lifting her from the depths of her own uncertainty. As the night wore on, Gustave's sister Emma, the chief counselor of Lumiere, ascended to the stage to deliver a rousing address to the expeditioners. Her words, imbued with hope and resolve, resonated through the gathered crowd as Sciel and Lune joined the others, united in purpose and in fate. With the dawn, preparations for departure began in earnest. The expeditioners assembled, their eyes fixed upon the monolith, the symbol of all they hoped to surpass. Lune paced the deck of the ship, mind racing with anticipation and apprehension. Sciel, standing at the rail, gazed out over the boundless sea, a quiet smile betraying her readiness for the adventure ahead. The anchor was raised, and as the vessel slipped into the mist, Expedition 33 set forth, into the unknown, into legend, and into the uncharted reaches of hope and destiny. The ship made landfall upon the forbidden dark shores, and Lune and Sciel, along with the other expeditioners, descended onto alien soil. Lune surveyed the desolate landscape, her senses alert as their commander Alan began to indicate various structures scattered throughout the landing site. The atmosphere was tense, each step heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. Suddenly, a sound arose, a slow, rhythmic thumping, reminiscent of a heartbeat or the measured ticking of a clock. The company's attention was immediately drawn, curiosity giving way to unease as an elderly man emerged from the gloom, his approach slow and deliberate, supported by a cane. Sciel's instinct sharpened, her body ready to spring into action should danger present itself, while Alan advanced to question the stranger. He inquired how the old man had survived the gamage, and demanded to know which expedition he belonged. Without warning or hesitation, the old man raised his cane, and in a single, swift motion, struck Alan down, severing his head in display of merciless efficiency. Shock reverberated through Sciel, who recoiled at the brutality, while Lune was left momentarily speechless by the sudden eruption of violence. Instinct took over as the group prepared to retreat, but the old man unleashed a barrage of chroma explosions, scattering the expeditioners as Nevrons called the Noir emerged from the surrounding darkness and commenced their attack. Chaos ensued. The expeditioners were overwhelmed, their numbers rapidly diminished as they were hunted and felled, one after another. Darkness claimed them, and for a time, there was nothing but silence and oblivion. Hours passed before Lune regained consciousness, her body sprawled near the spring meadows. Disoriented, she took stock of her surroundings, her mind racing to comprehend the events that had transpired. In the distance, she caught sight of the indigo tree, the predetermined rally point for any who became separated. Driven by resolve, she made her way toward it. Her path led her to a cave, its entrance lined with the petrified remains of expeditioners, both past and present, each a testament to the peril that had claimed so many before her. Within, she found Gustave seated beside the lifeless body of Catherine, despair etched into every line of his posture as he slowly raised his gun to his head. Lune, maintaining her composure despite the gravity of the moment, seated herself at his side. She understood that if he surrendered to death, she too would perish. There could be no survival in solitude. A brief surge of frustration passed through her as she insisted he awaken to reality, reminding him that neither of them was permitted to succumb, not when they were the only survivors. Gustave, broken by the carnage that surrounded them, pointed to the silent forms of their fallen comrades, convinced that hope had been extinguished. Yet Lune, steadfast and resolute, invoked the expeditioner's creed. When one falls, we continue. Her words, forged from necessity and tradition, cut through the haze of despair. As Gustave lingered on the edge of hopelessness, a colossal Nevron appeared near them, bearing down upon them. Lune assessed the threat and determined that now was the moment to put the Lumina converter to the test. Gustave, compelled by necessity, rose to face the danger at her side. Together they confronted the Nevron, and when it was defeated, Gustave activated the Lumina converter. The device functioned as intended, filling Lune with a surge of hope, the realization that they possessed a tool that might finally shift the balance in their favor. Refusing to yield to despair, she proposed they search for other survivors at the indigo tree. Elsewhere, in a forest filled with golden leaves, Sciel began to stir. She awoke with no understanding of where she had come to rest, anxiety threatening to take hold as she gathered her wits. The lore does not specify how long she wandered into the wilderness, nor does it recount the precise nature of her ordeal, but fragments gleaned from in-game dialogue allow for speculation. As Sciel traversed the woods, seeking survivors or any glimmer of hope, she encountered a being she had always believed to be the stuff of legend, a Gestrel. Meeting the creature with a rare smile, she requested its aid and knowledge. It is likely that the Gestrel, in accordance with their love for fighting, challenged her to a duel. Drawing upon her formidable combat skills, Sciel prevailed, impressing the Gestrel as it then guided her to the Gestrel village and to meet their chief Golgra. Meanwhile, Lune and Gustave pressed forward toward the indigo tree, their path marked by uncertainty and determination. Emerging from the shadows of an abandoned house, they paused to take in the haunting beauty of the landscape before them, the indigo tree looming in the distance as both a beacon and a promise of hope. Their journey was not without peril, as they fought through several Nevrons, each encounter a reminder of the relentless dangers that haunted the expedition. Scaling a series of handholds, evidence of passage of Expedition 69, they found themselves in a sheltered alcove carved into the cliffside. There, Lune took note of the petrified remains of several expeditioners, their bodies still and silent beside a formidable white Nevron known as a jar. The creature emitted a low grumble as Gustave instinctively drew his weapon, but Lune, observing its demeanor, halted his advance, recognizing that something was different. The jar was not attacking. Gustave surveyed the scene, suspecting the jar had been responsible for the fate of the expeditioners. Lune knelt, examining the creature more closely, while Gustave retrieved a journal belonging to Expedition 81. He invoked the time-honored maxim of the Academy: learn from those who came before. Lune, ever quick, responded in kind, and lay the trail for those that come after. Gustave began to read, searching for clues to the events that had transpired. Lune was astonished to discover the previous expeditioners had succeeded in communicating with the jar. Gustave speculated that the petrification of the bodies was due to their chroma being trapped within them upon death. Lune recalled that some members had vanished on the beach, but Gustave reminded her that the old man had not been a Nevron. Lune deduced that the act of a Nevron killing altered the chroma within humans when struck. Gustave, not above humor in dire circumstances, made a quip at her expense as the jar began to speak, declaring its need for light. Both were taken aback by the revelation. The Nevron could indeed communicate. Lune questioned what the jar meant by light, and Gustave, concerned, asked if the jar had killed the expeditioners. The jar denied any violence, asserting that it had been painted to bring light to the world. Lune inquired whether it had been painted by the Paintress. The jar, unfamiliar with the title, reluctantly affirmed, expressing its desire for guidance and light. Lune's curiosity was piqued. She resolved to help the jar find light in order to learn more about its nature. Gustave warned of the risks, but Lune's determination prevailed. They left the alcove, soon discovering some resin not far from where they had encountered the jar. Lune persuaded the reluctant Gustave to return, and together they ignited the resin within the jar's lamp. The creature expressed gratitude, sharing that it had waited endlessly for light and longed to rejoin the others. It implored its mistress to guide it and to capture the light, but the illumination faded abruptly. Disappointed, the jar confessed it could almost sense its mistress's guidance, but required more light to understand its purpose. Lune, still pondering the jar's cryptic requests, suggested that seeking out other white nevrons might yield further answers. As they turned to leave the cavern, a sudden arc of bright light streaked across the sky. Lune identified the flares and urged Gustave to hurry. Upon arrival, they witnessed Leo fleeing for his life. Gustave called out to him, but Leo was struck against stone by luminous vines, his body impaled and his fate sealed. A nevron known as an Avec appeared, its size and presence imposing. Lune cursed at its enormity as the two attempted to escape, only to be cut off by the Avec's vines. Forced to stand their ground, they summoned every ounce of strength as the battle commenced. Lune called out to Gustave, using her chroma to rise into the air and employing her earth elemental powers to propel Gustave upward. Gustave seized the opportunity, delivering a decisive blow that felled the Avec. The aftermath was marked by exhaustion and relief. Gustave managed to smile, which Lune briefly returned before reminding him the celebration would have to wait. They needed to seek safety near the top of the indigo tree. They ascended as the vines continued to siphon chroma from Leo's lifeless form. At the summit, disappointment greeted them. No other expeditioners had gathered. Lune observed a large red 33 inscribed alongside a message carved into stone, indicating that Mael had been taken to strange corals to the north and advising vigilance for a door within a hut. Ever skeptical, Lune questioned the legitimacy of the message, noting that protocol required all communications to be signed. Gustave countered her arguments, leading to a rapid exchange of conflicting protocols. Ultimately, Gustave forced Lune into a logical dilemma. He was determined to find Mael, with or without her, reminding her that the very protocol she championed also forbade solo movement. Faced with no viable alternative, Lune conceded. Bound by her adherence to reason and logic, she relented, and together they set off in pursuit of Mael, their resolve unshaken, their journey far from over. As they neared the region known as the Flying Waters, Lune, ever cautious and analytical, recommended they make camp and allow themselves time to recover. Gustave, driven by urgency, initially insisted that he was fine and ready to continue. Yet Lune, unwavering in her logic, reminded him that their efforts to find Mael would be futile if they lost their lives in the attempt. With reluctant acceptance, Gustave yielded, and the two set about establishing their camp amidst the unfamiliar terrain. In the quiet that followed, Lune gathered firewood and deposited it before Gustave, her posture rigid and her silence heavy with anger. Gustave, sensing the gravity of her mood, offered an apology for his earlier words and assured her that the tragedy on the beach was not her fault. Somewhat reassured, Lune set the fire ablaze, but she could not absolve herself, insisting that it was her own decision to land at the dark shores that had set these events in motion. Uncertain how to respond, Gustave suggested that they rest for a short while, though his mind remained fixed on the urgency of finding Mael. Lune, unwilling to let the moment pass, questioned whether they had learned anything from the ordeal on the dark shores. Gustave, undeterred, declared that Mael had endured solitude for far too long. Lune countered, reasoning that they lacked the manpower for a reckless rescue and that she refused to deliver Mael only the corpse of a would-be savior. Always guided by reason, Lune pressed further, urging that they act with caution and deliberation. She reminded Gustave that the old man on the beach had done more than decimate their ranks. He had exposed the gulf between their knowledge and the true dangers they faced. She emphasized the man's advanced age, his inexplicable survival of the Gamage, and the ease with which he had slaughtered their expedition. The threat, she urged, was far greater than they had imagined. Gustave conceded her points, but maintained that someone of such power would have no need to fabricate a message to lure them. He invoked the memory of those who had perished trying to save him, vowing that he would not allow Mael to die, that he would see her safely return to Lumiere. Lune, taken aback by the strength of his conviction, reminded him of the mission's importance, but Gustave, consumed by emotion, cast aside all pretense, placing Mael's life above all else. A surge of anger rose within Lune as she confronted him, challenging his resolve and invoking the sacred oath of the expeditioners. When one falls, we continue. Not if, but when. She reminded him that all had embarked on this journey knowing the risks, that every loss was to be endured and overcome, that the fight must go on, even if only one remained. Gustave insisted he was not afraid, but explained that Mael, Lune cut him off, asserting that Mael had understood the cost and accepted it, just as they all had. She pressed the question. Had they not always agreed that the future of Lumiere outweighed any single life? Did Gustave still believe in that idea? His answer came in the form of a shrug and a hope that he did. The certainty of the past now clouded by regret and weariness. A brief moment of levity followed, as Lune, finding humor in his earlier declaration, echoed his words about the mission and lightened the tension between them. Gustave joined in her laughter, and at last, a genuine apology passed between them. The night closed in, and they bid each other good night, each seeking what rest they could find amid the uncertainty of the journey ahead. Elsewhere, Sciel's path led her to an encounter with Golgra, the chief of the Gestural village. Granted permission to remain among the Gestrals, she accepted the challenge of the Gestural arena. With only a year left to live, Sciel embraced the unknown, entered the arena to face the village's finest warriors. Through strength, skill, and unyielding spirit, she triumphed over her opponents and ascended to the title of reigning champion. In the days that followed, Sciel found a measure of comfort and joy, her legend growing among the Gestrals as she continued to compete and carve her name into the annals of their history. Lune and Gustave pressed onward, arriving at the threshold of the Flying Waters, their mission unchanged, the search for Mael. The landscape unfolded before them in surreal wonder, fueling Lune's relentless curiosity. She moved through this unfamiliar realm with eyes wide, absorbing every detail, while Gustave, his thoughts heavier, lingered over the petrified forms of long-lost expeditioners. Drawing closer, Lune joined him. Gustave solemnly identified the fallen as members of Expedition 68, led by Elodie. Lune, both impressed and bewildered, questioned whether he truly remembered every commander of every lost mission. Gustave recounted the fate of the expedition and their ship, recounting the shadows of the past before urging that they press on. Mael, he believed, must be close. A surge of anticipation overtook him as a hut with a door came into view. Lune, ever the voice of caution, reminded him to think before acting. Both hurried forward, but Lune intervened, stepping ahead to survey the hut's perimeter. Finding no apparent threat, she signaled to proceed, and Gustave, with a blend of skepticism and impatience, moved to open the door. In an instant, a blind light engulfed them. Lune's exclamation was lost, as both were drawn through to the other side. Within, Gustave wasted no time, searching frantically for signs of Mael, while Lune steadied herself and studied the strange manner's surroundings. Her gaze lingered on a painting, but Gustave's voice called her back to the task as he shouted Mael's name. Their search led them to the second floor, where a gentle blue light spilled from a room. Inside, Mael sat at a desk, inscribing her thoughts into an expedition journal. Joy washed over Lune as she witnessed the reunion between Mael and Gustave, a fleeting moment of hope amidst the uncertainty. Yet even in this moment, Lune's mind remained restless, probing the room for its secrets. Her curiosity soon turned to concern as she questioned Mael about how she had come to be there. Mael, uncertain, explained that she simply woke up in that place, but hesitated as if recalling something more. The chroma in the room shifted, and all eyes turned as a faceless man appeared in the doorway. Mael explained that he had been helping her, but confessed she did not know who he was. Lune, ever analytical, sensed the difference in his chroma, unlike the Nevrons, before the man known as the Curator turned and departed without a word. As they prepared to leave the manor, Lune inquired if Mael knew who had left the message at the indigo tree. Mael, uncertain, denied knowledge. She instructed the Curator to meet them at camp, and together the three departed from the mysterious hut. Lune, ever the seeker, suggested they return and explore the manor further, but Gustave, pragmatic, felt they should instead return to the indigo tree. A sudden rumble shattered the calm. From a cluster of stones, a small gestural burst forth, confronting them. Lune's fascination was palpable as she immediately recognized the creature's significance, confirming with Mael that it was indeed a gestural, while Mael responded with playful derision toward the newcomer Noko. Noko, in turn, interrogated Gustave, while Lune, unable to contain her scientific wonder, examined the gestural with rapt attention. A realization struck Lune. If gestuals existed, then the legends of the Grandis and Esquier might also be rooted in truth. She questioned Noko about the existence of more gestuals, to which Mael replied that the gestural village was not far. Gustave recalled their priorities, reminding Lune that the Paintress remained their ultimate goal. Noko interjected, cautioning that without a way to cross the ocean separating the continent from the monolith, their journey would end here. Lune was stunned by this revelation, questioning whether there was truly another sea barring their path. Mael, with charm and wit, coaxed Noko into sharing how to proceed. Noko revealed that they must seek out Chief Golgra at the Gestural Village for guidance on crossing the sea. Lune's delight was unconcealed, the promise of further discovery reinvigorating her spirit. Gustave, amused, acknowledged that she would indeed have the opportunity to meet more Gestrals. As they continued through the flying waters, Lune's fascination only grew. She observed the Nevron crafting its own weapon, a testament to the intelligence of these enigmatic beings. Nearing the exit, the group entered a clearing, where a spiral of flowers encircled a lone red bloom at the center. Lune studied the intricate patterns, her mind attuned to both science and wonder, while Gustave's attention was drawn to the central flower, a poignant reminder of his lost love, Sophie. Unbeknownst to them, a presence watched from above, its movements concealed among the cliffs. As Gustave plucked the solitary flower, a massive Nevron, the Goblu, descended in a sudden, ferocious attack. Lune quickly perceived the cause. The creature's rage was tied to the removal of the flower. She noted that it had not attacked until Gustave had disturbed the earth. The three expeditioners braced themselves, launching into battle against the colossal foe. Their combined skills and resolve brought the Goblu low, but as Gustave prepared to deliver the final blow, Lune intervened, insisting that the Nevron would not attack if the flowers were left undisturbed. Gustave countered, wary and pragmatic, reminding her that the creature, like all Nevrons, was a creation of the Paintress and should not be underestimated. Maëlle, curious, reaching out to the Goblu, causing it to leap away in panic as Gustave unleashed another volley of gunfire, driving it into retreat. Frustration flared as Gustave admonished Maëlle for her recklessness, but Lune asserted the necessity of restraint. She warned that if they continued to destroy all they encountered, they would never truly understand the new world unfolding before them. With tensions high and the lessons of the encounter fresh in their minds, Maëlle pointed to the red trees marking the route to the Gestural Village. Together, the trio pressed onward, leaving the mysteries and perils of the flying waters behind as their journey continued into the unknown. That night at camp, Lune allowed herself a rare respite from study, finding solace in the quiet as she tuned her guitar and let her fingers shape gentle melodies. The night air shimmered with possibility and fatigue, her music weaving a fragile peace through the encampment. Gustave approached, drawn by the sound, and regarded her with a soft smile, a silent acknowledgement of how long it had been since he'd heard her play. Lune, not one to dwell on sentiment, shifted the topic, speaking instead of the Gestural Village and the mysteries yet to be unraveled. Gustave took the cue, chuckling quietly, pondering what other legends might prove true as their journey continued. Lune reminded him that in this war of information, so much remained unknown. Who the Paintress was, her origins, her purpose in enacting the Gamache. Even after all these years, the truth still eluded them. Gustave agreed, his thoughts returning to the enigmatic old man on the beach. He mused that if they could succeed in defeating the Paintress, future generations might finally be free to seek answers to these riddles. Lune, noticing the steadiness in his voice, observed that he seemed to be coping better. Gustave admitted that the shock had faded. He knew now that no one could be brought back, and that the only way to honor the fallen was to move forward, keeping the mission alive. Lune echoed the sentiment that tomorrow would come, and they both affirmed their commitment to press on. Her mind lingered on the resilience of the Gestrals, wondering aloud how they managed to survive so long. Gustave confessed he did not know, but Lune's anticipation grew. She could not wait to meet them herself. With that, they both settled in for the night, bracing for what the morning might bring. At dawn, their journey resumed, leading them through the ancient sanctuary where mischievous Gestrals and their formidable inventions challenged their progress. The trials tested their resolve, but ultimately guided them at last to the heart of the Gestural Village. Awe washed over Lune as she beheld a living, thriving community of Gestrals, the stuff of childhood stories now made real. Gustave, ever the observer, remarked on their remarkable survival skills. Maëlle, more practical, noted that intelligence was not always a prerequisite for survival on the continent. Entering the chief's house, they were greeted by Golgra. Lune's curiosity was unrestrained, eager to ask the chief countless questions, but Gustave brought the conversation back to their urgent purpose, relaying that Noko had said only Golgra could help them cross the sea to the Paintress. Golgra responded with amusement at humanity's obsession with the Paintress. Lune pressed further, asking if other expeditioners had come through the village before them. Golgra replied that she had lost track, noting that expeditioners passed through every few years. When she asked how this group had arrived, Lune revealed that the white-haired man had destroyed their ship. Golgra, recognizing the ordeal, commended them for surviving such a formidable encounter. Lune's curiosity sharpened, immediately inquiring how Golgra knew the man. Golgra explained that he had attacked the village once, and that against all odds, they too had survived. Golgra then revealed that the only way to cross the sea was with Esquia's help. Lune was electrified by the revelation that Esquia was real and close by. To reach him, they would need a password to pass the guards Suniso at Esquia's nest. Golgra was willing to give them the password, but only if they succeeded in the arena by defeating the reigning champion. Reluctantly, the group agreed, and Golgra led them down to register. They battled their way through the arena's contenders, each fight a test of their skill and resolve. At last, they faced the reigning champion known as the Stranger. As the announcer called the Stranger to the ring, Sciel made her entrance, alive in the moment, celebrating before the crowd and rousing their spirits for the coming battle. Then, turning, she met her comrade's eyes and was overcome with disbelief and joy at the sight of those she had thought lost. She embraced Gustave, and Lune questioned her arrival, but the announcer demanded the battle commence. The match was hard fought, but Sciel was ultimately defeated. Together, the reunited friends exited the arena. Maëlle remarked that the battles were not as bad as she had feared, and Gustave jested that it was akin to fighting the elderly. Sciel, ever playful, teased him about whether she counted as one of the old, to which Gustave replied that he hoped she would be one day. The group exchanged stories of their survival, Sciel relaying her journey through the Yellow Forest and her encounter with the gestural guide, while Gustave began to recount his own path, but Lune, ever focused, insisted they could discuss it later and needed to return to Golgra. Golgra congratulated them and delivered the password, "Get out of my way," instructing them to shout it as loudly as possible to Suniso. Sciel laughed at the absurdity of such a password, recognizing it as a fitting quirk of the gestrals. With instructions to head west for Esquia's nest, they departed, making camp as night fell. Around the campfire, Sciel confided in Gustave her astonishment that they had survived, admitting that hope had begun to fade for her. Gustave, ever the joker, asked if she would have remained the gestural champion until the Gamage if they had not arrived, to which she affirmed enthusiastically, declaring the experience fun. Later, Lune spoke with Gustave, sharing that Noko was obsessed with his mechanical arm, and that his apprentices would be proud to know the gestrals admired their work. She praised their creativity, and Gustave, in good humor, quipped that when life gives you lemons, and Lune finished the joke, calling the arm quite a lemon, with Gustave agreeing it was certainly not lemonade. Later still, Sciel sat apart, lost in thought at the edge of the cliff. Gustave joined her, offering quiet companionship. She greeted him with a smile, but when asked if she was all right, she deflected, referencing only bad memories. Gustave offered to listen, but Sciel, in her usual playful and flirtatious manner, refused to dwell on the past, instead expressing her gratitude for his presence. He assured her he would never abandon a member of Aquafarm 3. They reminisced about days long gone, remembering how inseparable Gustave and Sophie had once been, and how their efforts on the Aquafarm had fed so many and given a sense of purpose and good to their lives. Gustave reminded her that their work still mattered, and Sciel, reluctant but grateful, agreed. As the night wore on, the group gathered again at the fire. Sciel paced in anticipation, eager at the prospect of meeting Esquia. Lune too was filled with disbelief and excitement at the realization that both Esquia and the gestural legends were true. Their anticipation was interrupted as Sciel noted Maëlle fall into a trance. Concerned, they all surrounded her, asking what had happened. Maëlle, increasingly frantic, described seeing the white-haired man from the beach and a masked white-haired woman. Lune, ever the investigator, urged Maëlle to breathe and recall every detail, convinced that any clue could be vital. Maëlle recounted that the man blamed her for everything and insisted they must go home, describing the experience as a waking nightmare. As Maëlle's distress grew, Sciel tried to persuade Lune that now was not the time for interrogation. Despite her concern, Lune pressed Maëlle to focus and remember, while Gustave insisted they continue the conversation in the morning. Lune relented, recognizing the wisdom in his suggestion, and Gustave comforted Maëlle, seeking to bring her calm. The group resolved to rest, preparing themselves to seek Esquia's nest with the coming dawn. At dawn, the group set out and soon arrived at Esquia's nest, where the gestural guard Suniso awaited them. Suniso greeted the party and explained that entry to the cave required a password. Sciel, her eyes glistening with mischief, reminded everyone that the password must be shouted as loudly as possible, and, noting Gustave's reputation for volume, insisted he do the honors. Gustave, reluctant but resigned, braced himself as Sciel continued to tease him, urging him not to be shy. Summoning his resolve, Gustave bellowed the password with all his might. Suniso, taken aback and visibly wounded, admonished Gustave for such rudeness, revealing that Golgra had never told him the password at all, and that it hardly mattered. He would have allowed them to pass regardless. The group could not help but smile at Gustave's expense as he made a sheepish attempt to apologize, and together they entered the cave. Inside, Sciel remarked on the enchanting hanging lights, prompting Lune to note that legends claimed Sciel fed on light itself. Maëlle, struck by a sense of deja vu, shared her feeling, and Sciel agreed that the place felt strangely familiar. They climbed the steps to a vast pool, resembling a hot spring, where Lune observed that Sciel was nowhere to be seen. The silence was broken as Sciel swooped in, making a dramatic entrance by splashing into the pool. He greeted the expeditioners warmly, and Sciel responded in kind, drawing gentle scolding from the others for her exuberance. Sciel's gaze settled on her, and he immediately recognized her as his terrible swimmer friend, referencing the ordeal that had once brought her to the brink of death. Sciel was caught off guard, memories of her lowest moment flooding back. Sensing her discomfort, Gustave redirected the conversation, inquiring whether Sciel could assist them in crossing the sea to the Paintress. Sciel responded with a riddle, declaring that a rolling stone gathers no moss. The group exchanged puzzled looks, and Sciel explained that Sciel was renowned for his riddles. Lune, mindful of their mission, pressed the matter, asking Sciel directly for help. Sciel admitted he was not strong enough to carry them without his special stone, Flory, which had been stolen by his nemesis Francois. He explained that Francois was nearby and urged them to retrieve the stone. Gustave agreed, and Sciel expressed his delight at their willingness to help. Before leaving, Sciel lingered and asked Sciel how he knew so much about her. Sciel replied with another cryptic phrase, "Men trip not on mountains, they stumble on stones." Disappointed but accepting, Sciel rejoined her companions. Gustave inquired after her well-being, and Sciel replied that Sciel had certainly proven himself unpredictable. They entered Francois' cave and attempted to persuade him to return Flory. Francois, irked by the intrusion, responded with hostility, forcing the expeditioners to fight. After a hard-won battle, Francois relented and handed over a stone. On their return to Sciel, Lune reflected that neither Francois nor Sciel resembled Gestrels or Nevrons, prompting Gustave to speculate whether they too were creations of the Paintress. Lune considered the possibility, but Sciel posited that their origins may lie in another world entirely. Sciel examined the stone, but quickly declared it was not Flory. Lune, perplexed, asked for clarification. Francois, gloating from his cave, revealed the truth. He had never possessed Flory, only a similar stone, Uri, and Sciel had left Flory at the Stonewave Cliffs. Gustave questioned whether Sciel would still help them, and Sciel, ever whimsical, promised his friendship if they succeeded. He added that if they helped locate all his stones, he might even fly them into space, as he had once done with his best friend Verso. Lune agreed to the quest, and Sciel gratefully told them to search the Stonewave Cliffs to the north before leaping from the water and soaring away to meet them outside. That night, the party made camp once more, Sciel lingering by the firelight, and Gustave approached her, teasing that she had made a new friend. Sciel, referring to Sciel, admitted that he seemed sweet, and wondered aloud how he knew of her past as a terrible swimmer. She confessed that it reminded her of her attempt to drown herself. Gustave, recognizing the pain in her words, shared his own moment of despair after the attack on the dark shores, when hopelessness nearly claimed him as well. Sciel, empathetic, revealed that she had pieced together his struggle. She assured him that she understood better than anyone what it meant to stand at the edge of oblivion. She expressed gratitude that Lune had found Gustave before it was too late, just as someone had found her at sea. She told Gustave she valued his presence in her life, and he echoed the sentiment. Meanwhile, Lune stood in contemplation until Gustave joined her, remarking on the vast knowledge Sciel must possess. Gustave, with humor, asked if she planned to interrogate the legendary creature, and Lune affirmed that she could not pass up the opportunity to learn from a being of myth. As night deepened, the camp grew quiet, and each of them found rest, fortified by the bonds they had forged, and the resolve to face whatever dawn would bring. The following day, the group set out for the Stonewave Cliffs, the path ahead marked by uncertainty and the weight of their quest. Upon arrival, Gustave paused at the cliff's edge, gazing out at a colossal Ferris wheel-like structure wedged among the rocks below, a silent relic of another age, its purpose lost to time. Sciel, ever playful and flirtatious, joined him, teasingly suggesting a ride and making light of the old traditions, pondering aloud what couples might have done within those secluded cabins. Gustave deflected, unwilling to engage in her banter, instead speculating that the structure had once belonged to Expedition 50, an ill-fated attempt to reach the Paintress by traversing the sea in a giant wheel. Sciel mocked his seriousness as Esquia's voice echoed through the cliffs, declaring that he could sense Flory nearby. When asked if he could retrieve it himself, Esquia dismissed the effort, only to display his immense strength in a flash, effortlessly dispatching a massive Nevron known as a Bourgeon in the sea. Gustave, stunned by the display, questioned Esquia's true power, while Sciel, amused, half-joked that Esquia was both formidable and profoundly lazy. Pressing on, Gustave urged the group forward, and Sciel remarked on the strange nature of their companion. Their journey through the cliffs brought them to a shrine, erected in honor of the Paintress. Gustave, troubled by the sight, questioned how one could worship a being responsible for such devastation. Lune, ever pragmatic and logical, explained that in the face of the inexplicable, the weak-minded often turn to mysticism, while Sciel added that when at the mercy of forces beyond comprehension, survival might demand any form of hope, even reverence for the destroyer. With these reflections heavy in their minds, the group pressed onward. As they neared a shadowy cave, Esquia swooped by and warned that Sori was somewhere within, but he also sensed a lurking darkness. Gathering their courage, the four entered the cave, where scattered lamps flickered to life, guiding their path into the depths. At the cave's end, they confronted a formidable foe, the Lamp Master, a deadly Nevron whose presence radiated menace. Gustave declared that their only path forward lay in defeating the beast and recovering the stone. The group steeled themselves, engaging the creature in a desperate battle, their attacks coordinated and relentless. Ultimately, their combined strength sent the Lamp Master crashing through the cave wall and into the waters below. As exhaustion began to settle, Maël remarked on the ease of their victory, but Gustave cautioned against tempting fate. Lune searched for Flory, but found nothing, and then the earth itself began to tremble. The Lamp Master, undeterred, erupted from the depths for a second assault. Though weary, the expeditioners fought with all they had, each blow a testament to their determination. At last, the Lamp Master was defeated, sent tumbling once more into the abyss. As they caught their breath, Sciel discovered Flory, the coveted stone, lying near the place of their final struggle. Esquia, overjoyed, swooped down, and Sciel eagerly returned the stone to him. With Flory in his possession, Esquia announced that they were now ready to cross the sea. He plunged into the waters below, inviting the party to leap down onto him. Lune, energized by the prospect of finally moving forward, prepared herself, while Sciel, anxious about the water, inquired hopefully about the presence of wine. Esquia's voice echoed the word, adding a touch of levity to the moment. Gustave encouraged Sciel, reminding her that she could overcome her fear, and Lune demonstrated by taking the leap first, with Sciel following reluctantly behind. Once on board Esquia, Sciel and Lune regrouped, discussing their next steps and lingering questions as they awaited Maël and Gustave's arrival. Suddenly, commotion erupted above, the sound of chaos drawing their attention to the cliff's edge. Lune, sensing danger, called for Esquia to take them back up, but he confessed he was not yet strong enough to fly them. The Lamp Master, not yet vanquished, burst from the water, launching into a ferocious battle with Lune and Sciel. Exhausted but resolute, the two fought with every ounce of remaining strength, and at last, they destroyed the creature for good. As the tumult faded, they looked upward, spotting Maël at the edge of the cliff, her posture tense and gaze fixed on something unseen. Without a word, she turned and leapt down to join them. Sciel and Lune, anxious, immediately asked after Gustave. Maël's expression was grim as she relayed the bitter truth. Gustave had fallen. He was dead, and there was nothing more to be done but leave. The blow struck hard, sorrow mingling with shock, as Esquia carried the survivors to the nearest shore. They made camp under the shadow of loss, the night heavy with grief, and the knowledge that their journey would continue, but not unchanged. That night, Lune sat by the campfire in a state of shock, the flames reflecting the turmoil within her. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of the night. Sciel approached quietly and sat beside her, recalling with sadness that the last time they had found themselves together in this way, it had been to mourn their parents' passing. She reflected on the cruel pattern of their lives, noting that it seemed as though grief was the only thing that ever drew them together, and confessing a wish that their moments of reunion might one day be marked by joy instead of sorrow. Lune, on the edge of response, retreated into the familiar refuge of logic to shield herself from the pain of Gustave's loss. She insisted that nothing had changed, that they must continue toward the monolith, and began to list the setbacks, among them the loss of the Lumina converter. Sciel tried to draw her back from their relentless calculations, but Lune pressed on, her mind racing through every practical concern. At last, Sciel gently intervened, reminding her that the burdens of tomorrow could wait for another day. Sciel laid her head on Lune's shoulder in a gesture of comfort, assuring her that no matter the pain, tomorrow would still come. Their moment of solace was interrupted as a man approached the fire, prompting both women to rise to their feet. The stranger handed back Gustave's mechanical arm, advising that the best route to the monolith was through the quarry. Lune questioned his identity, while Sciel asked about his expedition uniform. The man expressed regret that he could not save their friend, and explained that he wore the uniform because he too was an expeditioner. Sciel pressed for clarity, and Lune stated she had never seen him before. The man revealed that he had been a member of the very first expedition. Lune, incredulous, asked how he could still be alive after so many decades, and he replied that some among them had simply stopped aging. Lune asked if the man who killed Gustave was one of them, and the stranger revealed that his name was Renoir, their former commander. The revelation struck hard. Lune questioned how Painted Renoir could have slaughtered his own people, with Sciel voicing her bewilderment at such a betrayal. The man explained that Painted Renoir's immortality had become a gift he was unwilling to lose, and that he believed killing the Paintress would strip him of that gift. Lune pressed further, asking if he truly valued his immortality, and he admitted that the endless cycle of watching loved ones die had become a terrible burden. He offered his help, should they accept his company. Maëlle spoke up, determined, declaring that if killing the Paintress meant the end of Painted Renoir, she supported the cause. She then asked the man's name, and he introduced himself as Verso. As the night wore on, Sciel and Maëlle remained by the cliff edge, while Lune stood apart, her gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of the monolith. Painted Verso approached, and Lune, calculating the years, asked about his age and the events known as the fracture. Painted Verso prepared himself for a long night of memories and answered her questions as best he could, until at last the camp fell into a troubled sleep. With the morning, the group departed for the rock quarry, once the site of a forgotten battlefield, now a landscape of devastation and memory. The destruction that surrounded them spoke of countless lost battles. Painted Verso said there was far more to be seen, and warned that they would eventually grow accustomed to it. Lune urged haste, noting they could reach their destination before nightfall. Maëlle, consumed by grief, asked if they could bury Gustave. Lune, focused on duty, replied there was no time. Sciel, ever compassionate, suggested they might find a place along the way, and Painted Verso quickly volunteered a spot where he had buried friends in the past, just beyond the quarry. Lune agreed, and they pressed forward. As they moved through the quarry, Sciel asked if all the dead they encountered were fellow expeditioners. Painted Verso replied that most had been slain by a single Nevron. Lune asked if the creature was still present, and Painted Verso, uncertain, replied that he had not seen it in some time. Eventually, they reached the far side of the quarry and began to cross the stone bridge. Painted Verso paused to check on Maëlle, who erupted in anguish. She lashed out, unable to bear the pretense that all was well amid such unrelenting death, and reminded them her brother, their friend, Gustave, was gone. Sciel moved to calm her, reminding her of the need to keep moving despite the pain. Suddenly, the Nevron responsible for the carnage appeared, the duelist, wielding its swords with devastating force. With a single blow, it shattered the stone bridge, sending them all plunging into a chasm overflowing with the bodies of fallen expeditioners and a vast pool of blood. Sciel and Lune landed hard, quickly seeing that Maëlle was injured and needed aid. Lune began to heal her, while Sciel moved toward Painted Verso's side. The group gathered before the deadly Nevron, bracing themselves for a battle that would test the limits of their strength and resolve. The fight was fierce, the duelists pressing them to the brink. Yet, through determination and unity, they gained the upper hand and had brought the creature down at last. As the dust settled, Lune saw Maëlle's horror at the sight of the countless dead. Lune placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, reminding her that this was the very cause for which they fought. She offered a small, resolute smile, and together they climbed out of the chasm toward the light above. As they arrived at the edge of the quarry, they came upon a red tree, surrounded with the armbands of expeditioners Painted Verso had once traveled with. Here, they paused to give Gustave a proper grave. Maëlle placed his mechanical arm atop the mound, and each of them offered a final farewell. Lune urged Gustave to rest easy, assuring him that his legacy was now in their hands. Overcome, she allowed herself a rare tear, reciting the creed that had guided them. When one falls, we continue. Sciel spoke next, telling Gustave there were no more domes, only open skies ahead, and that he had always been there for her when she needed him most. She asked him to greet Sophie wherever he now journeyed. Together, they held Mael and stood in silence, paying tribute before leaving the quarry behind and making camp for the night, carrying with them the weight of loss and the promise to endure. That night, beneath a sky heavy with grief, Painted Verso gathered the group around the fire to discuss the path forward. He spoke of the journey ahead, explaining that their next destination must be Minoko Station. Lune pressed him for a reason, prompting Painted Verso to reveal that there they must recruit an old friend, one who would be essential for the destruction of the Paintress's heart. Sciel, wary but curious, asked why the heart needed to be destroyed. Painted Verso explained that the monolith was encircled by a massive chroma barrier, a force so absolute that anyone who attempted to cross it were instantly erased. Only by destroying the Paintress's heart could the barrier be brought down. Lune, determined to understand, asked where the heart was and how they might find it. Painted Verso admitted uncertainty, but was confident it lay somewhere in Old Lumiere. The revelation stunned Sciel, asking if he had truly discovered Old Lumiere. When Painted Verso confirmed it, Lune realized that the old stories were true, that their city had once been part of something much greater. Painted Verso recounted how during his travels with previous expeditions, especially Expedition 58, they had uncovered Old Lumiere, but Painted Grimoire had erased the group before they could proceed any further. Resolved, Lune agreed to the plan. They would seek out Painted Verso's friend at Minoko Station, and then set their sights on the Paintress's heart. Later that evening, Sciel stood by the fire as Painted Verso approached. She questioned how far up the mountain the station was, and whether it was crowned with snow. Painted Verso replied that snow was common, prompting Sciel's excitement at the prospect. Snow, known only from stories and paintings in Lumiere, had become almost mythical. Painted Verso reminded her that snow could be deadly, but Sciel, filled with eagerness, recalled how Pierre had always dreamed of seeing snow. Fueling her anticipation, Painted Verso observed her openness compared to the others and offered a pact, a story for a story, as a way to foster trust. Sciel insisted that he go first, demanding that his tale be dark, melancholy, and personal. A brief, good-natured argument followed, with Verso answering some questions only in vague terms before departing. He later sought Lune, who immediately asked if his oldest friend was truly a Gestual. Painted Verso confirmed it, explaining their friendship had spanned ages. Lune reflected that Gustave would have admired such lasting bonds, so rare now in Lumiere. Turning serious, she questioned why Painted Verso was helping them, and he admitted that on the continent, choices were scarce. Lune pressed for details about his previous expeditions and their failures, and Painted Verso challenged her interrogative style. She insisted on directness for the sake of time, and he reminded her that trust required reciprocity. In return, Lune offered to teach him about Lumina, only for him to reveal he already understood it, to which she responded with wry amusement. Painted Verso, as a gesture of trust, allowed Lune 3 questions, to which Lune agreed on the condition that she could ask 3 follow-ups. He agreed, and though his answers remained elusive, her curiosity only deepened. Their conversation ended with more questions than answers, and they parted into the night. Later, Lune joined Sciel at the cliff's edge, updating her journal. Sciel inquired about her work, and Lune explained she was preparing plans for Expedition 32, should they fail, ensuring that those who came after would have all they needed. Sciel wondered how the journal would reach them, and Lune replied that she enlisted the Gestuals to help. Lune then asked what the stars whispered to Sciel, and Sciel shared that she whispered to them, a tradition taught to her by her father. Lune smiled, touched by the ritual. Sciel confided that she had spoken to the stars often after Pierre's death. Lune recalled their first meeting after their parents' deaths, and the shared comfort in the tower, admitting she had once believed her parents might have succeeded until the Gamage proved otherwise. Sciel acknowledged the solace of that day, then gently asked why Lune had distanced herself afterward. Lune explained it was not personal. She had chosen to cut off everyone, determined to finish her parents' work without distraction. Sciel reminded her that friendship was not a distraction, and Lune, now wiser, agreed. Sciel reflected on the brevity of their lives and the importance of human connection, especially with only a year left. They shared a laugh, wishing for wine, and spent a while longer together before Sciel retired for the night. Afterward, Mael approached Lune to apologize for her earlier words about Gustave's death. Lune reassured her, explaining that loss pushed some to run while others compartmentalized, and that she herself learned to use pain, guilt, fear, and anger as fuel to keep going. She described feeling the presence of lost loved ones when channeling her chroma, and encouraged Maël to do the same. Maël reached out, finding calm in the memory of Gustave, and asked how Lune always knew what to do. Lune confessed that she did not, and that no one truly did, sharing a secret laugh with her friend before they turned in for the night. The next day, they reached Minoko Station. The ruins of trains and platforms sprawled before them. Lune, ever the seeker, asked if it was true that trains had once crossed the continent before the fracture. Painted Verso confirmed it, even as a living, breathing Grandis caught Lune's eye, her excitement barely contained at the sight. Inside the station, they searched for Minoko, only to be ambushed by a white-haired Gestrel. Painted Verso intercepted the attack, and jested with the assailant, calling him slow, and the Gestrel questioned Esquier's involvement in this new adventure. Verso introduced him as Minoko. Lune, intrigued, asked how Minoko could speak their language, and Verso explained he had taught him over many years. Minoko, eager to impress, challenged them to a battle, and Painted Verso suggested that a good fight would be the best way to calm him down. The contest was fierce and unorthodox, but in the end, they prevailed. Their victory was short-lived, as Noko arrived with urgent news. A giant Nevron, a stalact, was approaching, and the Grandis had all gone into hiding. The group rushed outside to meet the threat. Minoko, ever the host, insisted the guests take the honors of fighting the beast. The women laughed, but Painted Verso assured them Minoko was serious. They engaged in battle, and after a hard-fought struggle, brought the stalact low. Minoko, impressed, tore off one of the Nevron's feet, and to everyone's astonishment, briefly transformed himself into a stalact. Lune looked to Verso for an explanation, and he revealed that possessing a Nevron's foot allowed Minoko to temporarily wield its power. With Minoko recruited, Lune, Sciel, and Maël conversed with Noko about recent events. Together, they resolved a journey to Old Lumiere, leaving Minoko Station behind as dusk settled, and they made camp for the night, each carrying the hope that the next step would bring them closer to an end and a beginning for themselves and their world. That night, as the campfire flickered against the darkness, Painted Verso approached Sciel. She remarked that Minoko seemed to bring a certain chaos wherever he went. Suspecting that he and Verso had gotten into their fair share of trouble over the years, Painted Verso admitted as much, and Sciel, with a playful glint, wondered whether their own group would be drawn into such trouble as well. Painted Verso assured her that any trouble would be only the appropriate amount, though Sciel, with her growing familiarity of gestural ways, noted that their sense of appropriateness was not quite the same as hers, recognizing her as someone who had seen the inside of their arenas, and she proudly declared herself their former reigning champion. They shared a moment of levity before Painted Verso moved on, eventually making his way to Lune, who sat apart, lost in thought. Lune questioned him about Minoko's unusual ability to use Nevron powers by collecting their feet. Painted Verso reassured her that Minoko had no interest in human feet. Her curiosity shifted to the bell attached to his weapon. Painted Verso explained that the Grandis had crafted it for him, and that its ringing kept Nevrons at bay, at least those with ears to hear. Lune then asked why he had chosen to remain on the continent, rather than return to Lumiere. Painted Verso recounted his return after the first expedition, how he and his father had contributed to the early construction of the Shield Dome. Lune, intrigued, asked what had changed. Verso revealed that, after returning alone, the people of Lumiere had grown suspicious of him, believing he possessed knowledge he did not have. Betrayed on his journey to the Paintress, his desire to return home had withered. Painted Verso then turned the question on Lune, asking if she missed home. Lune admitted she did, though she justified her presence by saying she was needed here, dedicated to solving the mysteries of the Paintress. Painted Verso teased her for dodging the question, and Lune conceded, confessing a longing for the city's Viano series. Painted Verso's eyes brightened at the memory, and Lune, after a moment's calculation, expressed her enjoyment of their conversation. Painted Verso accepted it as high praise. Lune, ever inquisitive, squeezed in a few more questions before they parted ways. Later, Lune, Sciel, and Maël gathered at the fire. Without warning, Lune heard Painted Verso's voice coming from behind, and when she turned, she was stunned to see only his lower half addressing her. Sciel gasped as Painted Verso's legs introduced themselves, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Moments later, his torso crawled up and claimed the same identity. Intrigued, Lune questioned how his legs could talk, and Painted Verso responded with a jest about training. Sciel, curious, asked if it hurt to be split in two, and Painted Verso, with a grimace and a laugh, insisted it did not. Lune pressed further, asking whether he healed himself from the top or bottom, or if he could control the process. Sciel wondered if split, he could scout ahead and stay behind at the same time. Painted Verso admitted it was possible. Their questions multiplied, the mood at camp lightening as curiosity and laughter replaced the weight of the day. Eventually, they all settled in for the night. That evening, Maëlle sought Sciel at the edge of the cliff. She asked if Sciel could help her become a better fighter, recognizing her as the best she knew. Sciel replied that emotions, if mastered, could become a powerful ally, not to let her brain deceive her in combat. She explained that unchecked emotions could blind a fighter to critical details or cause them to see only what they wished. Sciel advised her to recognize things as they were, not as she imagined, to adjust and adapt. She reminded Maëlle that everyone had a weakness, and that knowing her own was as vital as knowing her enemies. Maëlle, hoping for a simpler lesson, sighed, but Sciel laughed, and together they returned to camp, preparing to rest before their departure under the cover of night. After much needed rest, the expedition reached Old Lumiere several hours later. Sciel marveled at the realization that this ruined city had once been a part of their home, cast out to sea by the fracture. Lune noted that in a strange way, their exile may have spared them, for survival might not have been possible otherwise. They pressed deeper into the city. Their progress was halted by a massive collapsed building. Painted Verso pointed out that the Paintress's heart lay at the city's center and suggested that Minoko demonstrate his abilities. Minoko, with bravado, transformed into a stalactite and crashed through the debris, causing an explosion that separated the expedition. A short time later, Lune and Sciel regained consciousness, disoriented by the chaos. They heard Minoko's lament, his remorse for causing the separation. Lune, frustrated, demanded to know why he had acted so rashly. Minoko, apologetic and contrite, admitted he had only wanted to show off. Sciel reassured him, confident that the others would meet them at the heart of the city, and urged that they press on. Lune agreed, and together they continued their search. As they journeyed, Sciel wondered how their portion of the city had become an island while the rest had remained. Lune acknowledged it was one of the world's great mysteries. Sciel then questioned Minoko about life before the fracture. He described a world that was smaller, with many more gestrels, most of whom were lost in the cataclysm, and recalled forests filled with gestrels seeking rebirth. The group wandered the ruins, searching for clues and for signs of Maëlle, Noko, and Painted Verso. Sciel found one of Esquier's rocks, suggesting they surprise him with it, and Lune agreed. Sciel then admitted surprise at Lune for trusting Painted Verso's plan, and asked if Lune trusted him. Lune replied that for now, their goals were aligned. Sciel remained wary, feeling Painted Verso still hid something. Lune questioned Minoko about his relationship with Painted Verso, but Minoko feigned ignorance, claiming it felt as though he had always known him. She asked if they traveled with other expeditions. Minoko confirmed it, but was evasive about the details. Sciel proposed that they ask Painted Verso directly when they found him, and Lune agreed. Their path led them to a colossal female figure, a being with a city strapped to her back and a giant sword through her head pinning her to the ground. Lune, awed, asked Minoko about the creature, but he admitted it was his first time seeing it as well. Lune examined the remains of fallen members of Expedition 58, discovering a journal. Reading its contents, she learned the being was called an Axon, and that the expedition had come far. Then she gasped, her pace failing as she found something disturbing about Painted Verso. She confronted Minoko, demanding to know if what she had read was true. Minoko deflected, but Sciel reminded Lune that Maëlle was with Painted Verso, and they agreed they needed to reach them quickly. Minoko insisted that Painted Verso would never harm Maëlle, and together they hurried through the city. Eventually, they reached an open plaza where a grand manor loomed in the distance. As they approached, they saw Painted Verso, Maëlle, and Noko facing Painted Grimoire. Lune broke the tension by casting lightning at Painted Grimoire, who blocked it effortlessly with his chroma. The group reunited, and Lune explained their delay before demanding to know why Painted Verso had hidden that Painted Grimoire was his father. Painted Verso brushed aside the question, refusing to dwell on the past. Then Painted Grimoire struck his cane down, commanding their attention, and Painted Verso used the group to prepare for battle, declaring that survival was the only priority now. The battle commenced, each side trading blows as the expeditioners struggled to gain the upper hand. At last, their combined efforts forced Painted Grimoire to stumble. Painted Grimoire, unfazed, declared his disappointment and began to channel chroma through his cane, unleashing a devastating attack. Minoko leapt in front of Noko, shielding him from the blast. When the dust cleared, Sciel and Lune were horrified to see Minoko cradling Noko's lifeless body. Grief and rage surged as Mael attacked Painted Grimoire in vain, her strikes repelled by his chroma shield. He questioned why she refused to accept herself, preparing to deliver a final blow. Painted Verso, desperate, shouted Alicia move, intervening to protect Mael. In that instant, confusion swept through the group, as the manor in Painted Grimoire vanished without a trace. Painted Verso's anger echoed in the emptiness as the mood shifted around them. Shaken, the expeditioners gathered themselves and departed Old Lumiere, making camp with unresolved questions and the ever-present hope of survival. Back at camp, Sciel fed Dory to Esquier, who accepted with gratitude before she returned to the weary and disheveled group assembled around the fire. Painted Verso settled in, but the tension in the air was palpable. Lune, unable to contain her frustration, confronted him about the truth he had withheld regarding Painted Grimoire. Painted Verso, defensive, insisted that he did not consider Painted Grimoire his father, and when pressed by Sciel about his secrecy, asserted that the matter was private, painful, and not the concern of others. He had left Painted Grimoire decades ago. Lune countered that omission was still deception, that the right to know was theirs, not his alone. As the conversation escalated, Sciel intervened, urging everyone to understand each other's perspectives, and reminding them that only through trust could they hope to survive as a team. Minoko arrived, carrying Noko's remains in a gestural container. Lune, driven by hope, asked if the legends were true. Could a gestural truly reincarnate, and could Noko be restored? Minoko explained that he could bring Noko back, but warned that the new Noko would lack the memories of his predecessor. In essence, he would not be the same. Painted Verso, agitated, lamented that with the Paintress's heart now gone, there was no way to break the barrier. Lune, undeterred, reminded him that Expedition 58 had referenced another method. Painted Verso dismissed it as a dead end, but Lune insisted she knew who could help. She led them to the enigmatic curator. As they arrived, she began to question whether he could craft a weapon to breach the barrier. The curator offered no direct answer. Lune pressed further, inquiring about the need for something from the Axons. The curator repeated the word Axons, prompting Lune to ask if it was their hearts he required. Painted Verso clarified to forge such a weapon, immense chroma was necessary, power only obtainable from the heart of an Axon, and 2 would be required. He explained that the Axons were far more powerful than Nevrons, and that even with his immortality, he had never succeeded in defeating one. Mael asked why, and he told her that the Axons dwelled on the islands near the monolith, and even his own strength had proven insufficient. Lune, recalling the slain hauler in Old Lumiere, argued that it was not impossible. Painted Verso admitted he did not know how that Axon had died, and pleaded with them to accept that their chances were almost non-existent. Lune refused to concede, asserting that even if the odds were slim, she would rather die fighting than yield to death's inevitability. They returned to the fire, where Painted Verso insisted that if they were to attempt this, it must be done wisely. Sciel asked for clarification, prompting Painted Verso to reveal his knowledge of the Axons' locations. 3 near the monolith, 1 high on a mountain, 2 remote to propose an immediate threat, and 2 upon islands nearby. He suggested they target the damaged western Axon first, giving them the greatest chance of success. Lune agreed, recognizing the strategic value. Ever-spirited, Sciel proposed they test themselves against the eastern Axon first, earning Minoko's admiration for her fighting spirit. Painted Verso asked if she had heard anything he had just said to them, and Sciel deflected with a shrug. The group dispersed, each to their own thoughts. Later, the night's silence was broken by the rambunctious singing of Minoko and Painted Verso. Lune approached to quiet them, but ended up assisting them with cleaning Minoko's Nevron feet until the singing finally ceased. When it was over, Painted Verso joined Sciel, who pressed him on why, after all these years, he had never defeated an Axon, and why he believed their chances were so poor. Painted Verso joked that she had never cared about the odds, but she reminded him that she and Lune only had a year left, and Mael even more, and that their choices mattered. She then teased it must be story time, giving him returning to talk to her, and insisting he share something dark and personal. Painted Verso protested, but relented, revealing that after the fracture, his hair had turned white. He recounted how a gestural apprentice had dyed it, narrowly avoiding purple, thanks to a perpetually sleeping master stylist. Sciel laughed and insisted that purple would have been fun, then prepared to share her own story. She confessed that while her tale was not especially dark or personal, her students' bracelets were precious to her, gifts from children she might never see again. Painted Verso said that it was not necessarily true, but Sciel, ever a realist, explained the tragic truth of their world. Her youngest student was 6, destined to lose her parents to the gamage at 12, and unlikely to live past 21. She explained how these grim calculations shaped the lives and choices of her people. Early parenthood offered more years together, and lengthened the span of the next generation. Painted Verso agreed with her logic, and she told him she had no children of her own. As Sophie had always advised, loving her students enough to spare them that fate. Painted Verso fell silent, and Sciel declared her story sufficiently dark and personal, challenging him to match it next time. They bid each other good night and departed. Painted Verso found Lune still awake, the tension between them lingering. After a long silence, he broke the ice by asking if she liked dogs. Lune responded with mockery, suggesting he might be out of practice with real conversation. Painted Verso, undeterred, guessed she was a dog person, prompting Lune to recall her childhood dog Pat, named by her sister. Painted Verso pressed for more about her siblings, and Lune, a bit guarded, revealed she was the youngest and had an older sister and brother, and that it was her brother who introduced her to Gustave. When Painted Verso's questions grew more personal, Lune turned the tables, and Painted Verso agreed she could ask all night if she wished. Lune smiled, but with her in a good mood, she had forgotten to ask anything serious. Their conversation wound down, and eventually, both turned in, resting before the challenges of the coming day. The next day, Sciel swam them to Visage Island. As they began to make their way through it, Sciel asked if those were faces carved into the cliffs. Minoko answered that there was an endless sea of them. Sciel noticed a strange sound, and pointed out that it sounded like the island was singing. Mael seemed to recognize it, and Lune began to feel uneasy. They neared the center of the island, and above them the large faces began to move, then retreated to reveal a giant creature. The Axon waved its hand like a conductor, and summoned a mask that descended and began to examine them. Sciel asked what it was doing, as the mask continued to look them over. When it was finished, it flew back up to the Axon. Mael asked if it was an invitation. Sciel said it seemed that way, but Painted Verso stepped forward and said it was a trap. Sciel agreed, stating that something felt off. Suddenly, darkness surrounded them as the mask keeper approached. They all drew their weapons, wary of him, but he said they would not need them and that he meant no harm. The mask keeper told them that Visage invited them to join him at the end of the path. Sciel then asked where the other paths led. He told her to walk them as they wished, that masks were meant to illuminate and not obscure, and to look for the masks they needed. He bowed and left as the light returned. Sciel asked if they should go to the Axon now, or explore the other paths first. They first went down the path that represented joy. As they ventured down it, Sciel saw the dancing Nevron-looking creatures as joyful, and admitted she was a bit jealous. Minoko noted that the joy was only on the surface. Lune repeated the Axon's title, He Who Guards Truth with Lies. At the end of the path, they faced the mask representing joy, and battled the creatures it spawned. The mask began to laugh hysterically until it collapsed. When they returned to the center, Sciel noted that defeating the mask hurt the Axon. Lune suggested they keep doing so. Next, they went down the path that represented sadness. The creatures here were all slumped over. Sciel said that even though she knew they were Nevrons, witnessing their sorrows made her kind of sad. Minoko told her that would be a fatal impulse to follow. They approached the mask representing sadness, fought the creatures it summoned, and finally brought the mask down as well. When they returned to the center, Mael and Painted Verso pointed out that they were definitely weakening the Axon. Sciel voiced her concern that something still felt off. They went down the path that represented anger. Lune pointed out all the destruction. Minoko said even he would admit something did not feel right. Sciel simply pointed out that it was rage. They confronted the mask and battled its minions, fighting hard until they finally brought it down as well. When it was finished, they returned to the center. They began their ascent to face the Axon. Along the way, Lune asked what He Who Guards Truth with Lies meant. Minoko said that's what it means, exactly what it says. Sciel asked if guards meant protect or control, and Minoko simply answered, yes. They finally arrived as the sky turned dark red. Visage rose from the mist and waved his 2 batons, energy surrounding him, then sent a mask before them. Sciel picked it up, and as she gazed at it, the mask began to lock her into a trance. She managed to resist its hold and hurled the mask back at Visage, angering the Axon. Visage paused, then, in a fit of rage, spun his mask around him and readied himself for battle as the expeditioners did the same. The battle was hard fought, and Visage pressed the expeditioners until they finally landed the final blow and brought him down. Struggling to catch their breath, they were surrounded in darkness again as the mask keeper stood before them. He He passed by and picked up the mask, saying that people want to know what is behind the mask, and that the mask is always a window or a mirror. He drew 2 swords. Sciel stated he was the real Axon. He said that they all need masks, but the rest of his words did not come out as he thought about them. The group prepared for battle and fought for their lives, exchanging blow after blow until finally they struck him hard. Both the expeditioners and the mask keeper struggled to recover, but he summoned the last of his power. The mask keeper told them that they all need masks, as he began to summon a flurry of masks around them. The masks latched onto them one by one, except for Minoko. Sciel calmly pulled the mask from her face as she realized something. She stood before the mask keeper holding up the mask and told him that the mask could not hurt her because it was her. She looked at Minoko, then approached the mask keeper, reached out, and snatched the mask from the Axon's face. This caused the Axon to be defeated and released the others from their hold as Sciel stood holding the Axon's heart, the mask itself. The others stood as Sciel exclaimed that he was down and that they should get back to the curator. They gathered their strength and left the island to make camp for the night. Back at camp, Lune attempted to give the mask to the curator. The curator raised his hand and motioned to Mael. Realizing the intent, Lune passed the mask to Mael. As Mael handed it to him, she suddenly snapped back, clutching her head in pain. Sciel immediately asked her what had happened. Mael struggled to find the words, but at last managed to say the name, Grimoire. Painted Verso told her that he saw painted Grimoire in his dreams as well, and Mael stared back at the curator for a long while. After a moment of uneasy understanding, the group dispersed around the camp for the evening. Later, Painted Verso approached Sciel. She told him there was one Axon left, to which he replied that the next would be much harder. Sciel joked, asking if he was trying to make up for the last terrible story he told. Painted Verso admitted he hadn't expected her story to be so deep. Sciel teased that he wasn't up to the challenge, but he insisted he was there to offer her a better story this time. Painted Verso recalled her calling him vain and played along, but reminded her she was the one who actually said it. He explained that if he were truly vain, he would have healed his scar long ago. Being immortal, he could do so at any time, but he chose not to. Sciel, intrigued, asked why he chose to keep it. Painted Verso told her it served as a reminder of the day he had stood up to his father and walked away from his family. He declared with pride that his story was dark and personal, but Sciel suggested there was more to it. She pointed out that his father, Painted Grimoire, bore the same scar. Painted Verso said they disagreed about everything, even the lines they would not cross, and that's why he had to leave, even though his father disapproved. Sciel asked if they had fought, and Painted Verso said it was the first time they had ever fought physically. Sciel observed that since his father was immortal as well, he must have chosen not to heal his scar either. Painted Verso admitted he had never thought of it that way. He then asked if that story was dark and personal enough. Sciel said it was better than the last. He asked if it was good enough to learn about the scar on her stomach. She replied that everyone has scars that will not heal, and sighed, saying that story would have to wait for another time. She changed the subject, complimenting his scar, and saying it enhanced his looks. Painted Verso joked that it was why he kept them, and Sciel replied that she had known all along. They continued their conversation a little longer, then parted ways for the night. Painted Verso then went to speak with Lune. He told her that she had been right about their chances against the Axons, and she agreed. He called her a night owl, saying she never slept, to which she replied that she got enough. Painted Verso asked what kept her awake at night, but Lune turned the question back on him. He pressed for an answer, and Lune confessed she struggled to turn her mind off, that it was like a puzzle she could not let go of until it was solved. He asked what she was currently trying to solve, and Lune said she was focused on the white talking Nevrons, whose thoughts and feelings made no sense to her. She thought that if she could find more of them, it could solve a major mystery behind the Paintress. Painted Verso said that he had spoken to some, but claimed they only spoke madness, and were not worth her time. Lune teased him for not asking the right questions, and Painted Verso said he lacked her experience. Lune turned the topic back to him, asking why he could not sleep. Painted Verso joked that it was the weight of the world and his tortured soul. Lune acknowledged the joke, but pressed for a real answer since she had shared hers. Painted Verso diverted by asking if it felt good to finally share, to which Lune said it was even better when others did the same. At last, Painted Verso admitted that he used to have terrible dreams, but when they stopped, it was even worse, replaced by an oppressive void. Lune, fascinated, asked if he felt pain or the passage of time while he slept, and said she should observe him for science. Painted Verso joked that sleeping in the open was hardly private, and told her to go ahead. Lune smirked and agreed, saying it was for science, and he replied in kind. She asked him a few more questions before going to settle in for the night, preparing to face the next Axon. The next day, they arrived at the island where the next Axon resided. Upon entering the structure, Lune took note of the unique architecture, remarking on its distinctiveness. Minoko explained that this place had not existed before the fracture, and Sciel observed that it was both surreal and beautiful. They advanced carefully, approaching the edge of a wide walkway and looking down into a massive cavern below. There, within the depths, a creature moved, dancing and swaying as it sang a haunting, hypnotic tune. Lune gazed in awe, asking if this was the Axon. In response, the Axon sent forth miniature versions of itself, the ballet, which began to dance around the expeditioners. Minoko called her Siren, she who plays with wonder. And as the ballet continued their mesmerizing dance, each member of the group began to fall under their spell. Their reactions varied as the trance deepened, and Maëlle asked what was happening. Lune admitted she was unsure, feeling the effects of Siren's magic. Minoko warned them to focus, revealing that Siren was manipulating their minds. He struck his bell, and the ballet scattered, breaking the spell. Gradually, the expeditioners began to recover, and Minoko explained that Siren did not simply play with wonder, but distorted the mind itself. With their senses restored, Painted Verso urged the group to move quickly and reach Siren before her influence could claim them again. They pressed onward, fighting through more creatures as they advanced toward the center, the entrance to Siren's domain. As they drew near, Lune, still awestruck, remarked on Siren's grandeur. Painted Verso checked on her, asking if she was alright. The group assembled before the massive Axon, Lune's face undiminished as she continued to study Siren and wonder. Siren continued her hypnotic singing and dancing, swaying with an unnatural grace. The Axon bent down, inspecting the group, peering deeply into their hearts and minds. She conjured forth the deepest desires of each. Lune saw her parents smiling, while Sciel beheld her husband and the child that could have been. Then, abruptly, the mood shifted. Siren leaned back, her dance growing more intense as she swept her hand past them, erasing their visions and taking their dreams away. Lune and Sciel, left dismayed by the loss of their loved ones, searched in vain for the vanished apparitions. Siren's dance continued as the expeditioners steadied themselves, drew their weapons, and prepared for battle. The ensuing conflict was fierce and disorienting, Siren attacking in ways for which they were unprepared. Yet, by drawing upon their strength and unity, they managed to stun the Axon, buying a moment to catch their breath. There was no respite, however, as Siren halted her dance, leaned back, and paused once more. She then leaned forward, scanning them with renewed intensity, probing their minds and attempting to break their will. Lune, gathering her resolve, managed to maintain her senses. Siren lowered her hand and stopped it before Lune, who was smirking slightly. Lune stepped onto her hand, and Siren lifted her up, bringing her face to face with the expeditioner. Lune, holding a faint smile, focused a massive surge of chroma. Siren leaned in closer, the chroma building between them in a growing, unstable force. Lune drew upon more and more chroma, the energy mounting until at last it exploded. The blast knocked Siren's head backward, and the Axon began to fade. As Siren dissolved, the others recovered from their ordeal. In the wake of the fading Axon, she left behind her heart, a cut of cloth. The group gathered themselves, retrieved the cloth, and departed from the island, making camp for the evening to recover from the harrowing encounter. Back at camp, the group gathered before the curator. Maëlle, holding the cloth, stepped forward to hand it over. She began to give the cloth to the curator, but as she did, she was suddenly knocked backward. Sciel rushed in to check on her. Lune leaned in and asked Maëlle what she saw. Maëlle struggled to find the words, then finally said she saw a woman and asked why she kept seeing things. She turned to the curator and asked who he was. The curator took the cloth and the mask, then turned away from them. He began to draw on both objects, warping and shaping them with chroma until the energies merged and coalesced. He turned around, now holding a glowing sword, and held it out in front of him. Sciel gestured for Maëlle to take it. Maëlle moved forward, looked around, and then took the weapon into her hand. They all headed back to the campfire and left the curator in peace. Painted Verso approached Sciel. She told him he seemed preoccupied. He replied that it had been a long road to get there and admitted to feeling nerves, while Sciel remarked that it must feel especially long for someone who is immortal. Painted Verso observed that she seemed relaxed, but Sciel said she was a little nervous, yet resolved that they would do everything they could, and would either succeed or fail. He told her that Lune was tense, Maëlle nervous, but she always appeared calm. Sciel replied that there was nothing strange about it, and that she and Death had walked together for some time. Painted Verso said it had been the same for him. Sciel stated that death was a friend, one that would welcome her. Painted Verso was puzzled by her words, so Sciel explained that death would welcome her home, to everyone she ever loved. Painted Verso asked if she believed in an afterlife. Sciel explained that she did, but even if there wasn't one, she would still join her husband in death. Painted Verso found her perspective interesting for someone so young. Sciel joked that he should share his ancient wisdom with her. Painted Verso acknowledged the joke and asked her to share his wisdom with Minoko as well. Sciel replied that Sciel and Minoko were even older, so she should ask them instead. Painted Verso said she would learn a lot about rocks and never on feet that way, and offered to tell a story instead. He joked that it would be really dark, but Sciel told him to save it for later, and that they should do other things instead. She helped him connect the dots, until he realized what she was suggesting, then ultimately turned her down. Sciel, not used to being rejected, was slightly disappointed, but still enjoyed their conversation, and they went their separate ways. Later, Painted Verso approached Lune. She told him she couldn't believe they were finally so close to the end, and said that Sciel was right about him. Painted Verso admitted he would never have gotten this far alone. He asked if she was working on the Expedition 33 journal, and if she was planning on dying soon. Lune replied that no one knows what tomorrow brings. He asked if she always took such detailed notes. Lune began to explain that her parents had made her their apprentice since she was 4, and that they were obsessive researchers. Painted Verso commented that it seemed young, but Lune said it was not, given their short life expectancy. She described how her parents had chosen her to be their apprentice, the one who never went home for the evening. She smiled and congratulated Painted Verso on getting her to talk about herself. Painted Verso joked that was how she should ask questions, then shared that his parents were renowned artists who had pressured him to follow in their footsteps. He revealed his true passion was music. Lune told him music was her passion as well, and he suggested they play together someday. She agreed. They talked a little longer, then returned to the campfire and sat with the others. As they sat around the fire, Sciel said that they had actually done it. Mael stated that they would finally face the Paintress. Lune agreed, saying the cycle would finally be broken. Sciel smiled, looked around, and said that someone had been hiding a secret from them. Lune asked what she meant. Sciel looked at Painted Verso and playfully accused him of thinking they would never find out. She said nobody ever wondered what Sciel was made of, and revealed that she and Sciel had chatted. Sciel apologized to Painted Verso as Sciel held up a cup, then punched Sciel in the stomach, causing a liquid to pour from his mouth into her cup. Sciel said to Painted Verso that Sciel had promised him rocks in exchange. Lune, confused, asked if it was wine, and Sciel handed her the cup. Painted Verso said the wine was part of many excellent vintages he had stored inside Sciel. Sciel continued to make rounds, handing cups to everyone. As Painted Verso said he wasn't used to sharing, but would make an exception this night. Sciel continued to punch Sciel, pouring out more and more wine. As Sciel said he had always told Painted Verso he shouldn't drink alone. Sciel sarcastically raised her glass and toasted Painted Verso's generosity. The group smiled and shared a laugh. Mael wondered how they liked it, to which Lune replied that it comes with age. Painted Verso stood and told them to enjoy their drinks as he left to be alone for a while. The celebration continued. They shared stories and laughter around the fire while drinking Painted Verso's wine. Lune bombarded Minoko with questions, and Sciel and Mael danced and sang together in what might be their last night. Eventually, the fire faded and the group settled in for much-needed rest. The next day, Sciel swam them to the barrier. Lune stepped forward with caution, holding the barrier breaker blade. She raised the weapon and tapped the barrier several times, checking for any adverse reactions. When she was satisfied, she turned and smiled at Mael, telling her to do the honor, and handed her the sword. Mael looked at everyone and smiled as she stepped toward the barrier. She tried to pierce it, but the strain forced her back. She tried again. The effort was immense. The barrier finally broke. The chroma around them fell like dust, and they all gazed on in wonder and excitement. They made their way to the shattered land where the monolith stood, with the enormous Paintress sitting and crying at its base. Lune and Sciel slowly approached, taking it all in with the others. Mael said they could do this for Gustave. Lune smiled and answered that they could do it for everyone. Sciel and Lune nodded, acknowledging the sentiment as they all began the long walk down the path toward their objective. As they arrived, they slowly approached, taking in the sheer size of the being they had come to destroy, each of them bearing different emotions on their faces. They settled themselves, preparing, drawing their weapons, and steeling themselves for the battle ahead. The attack began, and they threw everything they had at the Paintress, striking repeatedly, but every attack proved futile. At last, exhausted, they fell back, struggling to stay upright. Lune shouted that they were doing nothing to her, and Painted Verso said he thought their gradient attacks would have had an effect. Sciel fell into a trance and slowly walked towards the Paintress. The others watched as the faceless woman from the manor in Old Lumiere appeared. Painted Verso began to panic as Sciel reached for the woman, who looked at her blankly. Suddenly, Sciel's face was set ablaze. The group watched in shock as she screamed, and then Lune and Sciel's faces caught on fire as well. The three screamed in agony. Painted Verso looked back and forth between the woman and his friends, struggling to understand why she was doing this, eventually moving to comfort Sciel until he too was consumed by the flames. The woman continued to look at them as Painted Verso began to scream in pain, and then, when the flames finally subsided, the woman turned and walked away, leaving the fire to extinguish itself. They slowly recovered. Lune asked if everyone was alright. The woman opened a portal and stepped inside, leaving it open as if inviting them to follow. Painted Verso told everyone to follow quickly. This might be their only chance. Lune agreed, and they all moved through the portal. Inside, Lune expressed her shock. They were actually inside the monolith. She asked why the woman had helped them to get in. Sciel noticed Sciel's concern and asked if she was alright. Sciel said the Paintress was above them, and that she could sense the real Paintress's heart somewhere higher. They made their way through the distorted versions of their world, glimpsing memories as they went. Eventually, Sciel and Lune realized these were the Paintress's own memories, though they did not yet fully comprehend what they were seeing. At last, they reached one of the highest areas in the monolith and were confronted by an image of a man and a woman holding hands. They stared at the image until it was broken by the arrival of Painted Grimoire. He slowly approached, disappointment in his eyes, and advanced toward Painted Verso, who stepped forward to meet him. Painted Verso told his father that they were taking the Paintress down. Painted Grimoire reminded him that she was not the only one who grieved. Painted Grimoire said that he had been given the memories of losing his son, and that perhaps it was punishment for the Paintress not receiving comfort when she needed it most. He looked at Painted Verso and told him he would not lose his son. Painted Verso called that son a stranger, but Painted Grimoire immediately denied it. Painted Grimoire said that by making this choice, Painted Verso was leaving him no alternative, and asked how he was any different from the Paintress in doing so. Painted Verso simply responded that he was tired. Painted Grimoire told his son to trust him, claiming that they were his family. Painted Verso replied that family is complicated. Painted Grimoire said that if saving him meant losing him, it was a price he would pay. The rest of the group, following Painted Verso's lead, drew their weapons. The battle began, relentless and exhausting, but the expeditioners fought on and eventually defeated Painted Grimoire. He fell to one knee, and Sciel knocked him down. As they stepped back to catch their breath, Eileen's chroma revived Painted Grimoire, his immortality restoring him once more. He slowly stood, his wounds healing, and told Painted Verso to remember who his family was. He insisted it was not Sciel, but his sister, his mother, and himself, and told Painted Verso he was condemning them all. Painted Grimoire asked who his son thought he was saving, but Painted Verso answered that his father was too delusional to understand. Painted Grimoire paced, then threatened them with the second destruction of the Descendre family. He slammed his cane into the ground, pinning the others and draining their chroma. They all struggled to stay upright as their life force drained away, until the pain suddenly ceased. The curator arrived. He walked slowly toward Painted Grimoire as he began to stand. Painted Grimoire said they finally met, and told him that this was all he had left of his son, that destroying it would not bring his wife back, and that it would sever their last tie. The curator moved to Sciel and took her hand, placing it on Painted Grimoire's chest. Painted Grimoire told the curator he loved them too. A surge of power passed through Painted Grimoire, and he was gommaged in an instant, his chroma erased from the world. Lune asked Sciel how she did it. Sciel said she was not sure, only that she felt it. Lune asked if she could do it again, and Sciel said that she thought so. Sciel approached Painted Verso and asked what Painted Grimoire had meant about the curator. Painted Verso said he was not really sure. Sciel said she was through the far exit. Lune told them that the future of Lumiere was ahead, everything every expedition had tried to achieve before them. She smiled, saying she trusted everyone there, and together they regrouped and made their way through the exit. They ascended to the summit of the monolith, approaching the Paintress as she awaited them. She gazed out over the fractured city in the distance, a city that remained forever beyond her reach. Turning to face the group, the Paintress met their eyes, and Sciel observed aloud that she resembled the curator. Lune, putting the pieces together, declared that the Paintress was the curator's wife. The Paintress looked to Painted Verso and asked if he had returned, prompting Lune to turn to him in confusion and the faintest trace of anger. The Paintress's demeanor shifted. She became confused, questioning the fire, and uncertain if what she saw was truly there. She began to wonder aloud if the curator was deceiving her yet again. Her gaze fell upon Maëlle, whom she called Alicia, and she asked about her face. Maëlle, unflinching, asked if the Paintress intended to burn it again. Lune pressed further, asking if Alicia was the Paintress's daughter, while Sciel inquired if Maëlle reminded her of her own child. The Paintress asked Painted Verso to come home with her, but he recoiled, telling her that it was time for her to return home instead. The Paintress, convinced it was all a trick, insisted that Maëlle was not truly Alicia, and that Verso was not her son. Painted Verso confronted her with the truth, telling her that her son was dead. She refused to accept this, insisting they were his creations, and that she would not allow them to take away her canvas. With that, she unleashed a wave of chroma, encircling the area as the expeditioners braced for battle. They fought with all their skill, returning every attack, pushing themselves to their limits, until at last they landed a powerful blow and the Paintress collapsed. The ground shook violently, and Painted Verso sensed something was wrong. Suddenly, the colossal figure of the Paintress at the monolith's base rose to confront them. Painted Verso called for Sciel, who soared up to their aid. As Sciel arrived, Painted Verso told him that he had found Sori, and when he threw it, Sciel absorbed it, gaining the ability to fly the expeditioners. They mounted Sciel's back as the Paintress ascended with her monstrous creation, and the group rose to meet her in battle high above the monolith. The fight was fiercer than any before, each of them forced to summon their deepest reserves of strength to repel her attacks. They pressed on, undaunted, and finally brought down her monstrous creation, knocking the Paintress back to the summit. She lay collapsed, and the expeditioners dismounted Sciel to confront her one final time. As she struggled to rise, she reached for Painted Verso, stumbling before him. He caught her as she reached up, asking him why. He told her to rest, assuring her that things would get better. Lune and Sciel gathered close, as Maëlle knelt beside the Paintress, and Painted Verso placed her hand on her chest. The Paintress began to fade into golden flowers, her presence vanishing from the world. Sciel smiled as she watched the chroma release from the monolith and saw the number 33 finally fade from its surface. She announced that it was over, the number gone at last. Lune smiled in turn, affirming that the Paintress was truly gone. Minoko told the expeditioners that they were finally free. Maëlle, with disbelief, asked if this could be real, and Sciel knelt beside her smiling, telling her yes, and that Gustave was watching them. She handed Maëlle an Expedition 33 flag and asked if she wanted to plant it. Maëlle took the flag and walked to the edge of the monolith, with Lune and Sciel following. As they reached the precipice, Lune remarked that no one was coming after them, and Sciel smiled, calling it symbolic. Maëlle planted the flag, and together they looked out toward Lumiere, a wave of relief washing over them after all they had endured. Maëlle said, "Let's go home," and Sciel agreed. Sciel carried them home, each lost in private reflection. Sciel's joy could not be contained as she moved about Sciel. She joked with Painted Verso, asking if he still felt immortal, and he replied that he felt no less so than yesterday. She laughed and challenged him to a duel to test it, but he politely refused. She turned to Minoko, asking why he had been silent since they left, as Maëlle wondered what came next. She questioned how with the Paintress gone, they were supposed to just move on. Sciel smiled and said that they would, for many decades now, and that perhaps this is what immortality felt like. She stood and asked what they would do with all the extra time, and Lune reflected that while the expeditions may be done, there was still so much to learn about their world and the universe. Their thoughts were interrupted as Sciel called out that Lumiere was below. They prepared to land, and upon arrival, they were met with a hero's welcome. The entire city gathered to celebrate, and though slightly embarrassed, the expeditioners were proud, basking in the applause and cheers. Lune joined the members of Expedition 32, recounting their journey as they congratulated her. Sciel, meanwhile, stayed with Minoko, helping him and calming the children, who were in shock at seeing a real gestural. The celebration continued, the city rejoicing in this long-awaited moment. But suddenly, the sky darkened, and a wave of chroma swept through Lumiere. Moments later, the gamage began anew, overtaking adults and children alike. Sciel felt the gamage upon her, but did not panic, instead lifting her gaze to the sky, smiling, and accepting her fate as her world faded into darkness. Lune, seized by panic, frantically searched for a way to halt what was happening, desperate to understand. Powerless to intervene, she turned in time to see Maëlle reaching for her, and then Lune was gone, and nothingness consumed her too. As if suspended in that moment, Lune and Sciel found themselves back at camp, alive and well, both bewildered by what had just transpired. Still dazed, they stood and tried to gather their bearings. Lune turned to Mael, her confusion giving way to curiosity, and asked about her hair, now completely white. Mael simply smiled, telling them that there was much to discuss as she began to explain what had happened. A few moments passed as Mael recounted everything. When she was finished, Lune checked to be sure she understood, asking rhetorically if Mael was the Paintress's daughter, and now a Paintress herself. The realization struck her hard, and something within her snapped. She went straight to painted Verso, unleashing her frustration. Lune accused him of knowing all along and remaining silent, calling him both a coward and a betrayer. As Lune continued to vent, Sciel turned to Mael and asked if she could bring them all back, everyone they had lost. Mael replied that she could, but would need a great deal of chroma, and that her father, the curator, now revealed as the real Renoir, controlled it all. Lune interjected, stating that the expeditioners killed by the Nevrons still had their chroma trapped within them, and suggested they could use that. Mael agreed, explaining that while the chroma was there, it was not pure, and she would not be able to restore them as she had Sciel and Lune, but that it could be used another way. Minoko then stepped forward, declaring that it was time for the greatest expedition of all time. They all turned to look toward the horizon, then eventually spread out around the camp to prepare. Later, Painted Verso reluctantly approached Sciel. She cut him off, telling him to save his excuses. She knew he did what he thought was necessary. She acknowledged that he was wrong, but also that she understood. He was surprised by her reaction, but Sciel explained that she was angry, but then simply got over it. She said everything she thought she knew was wrong, but it didn't matter, because now she understood that death was not the end, and she could see Pierre again. When Painted Verso tried to explain, she told him she would trade him in a heartbeat to get her husband back, and that things were fine between them. He should stop worrying. He thanked her, and she told him he now owed her and would have to help her get her husband back. Sometime later, Painted Verso mustered the courage to approach Lune and attempted to explain himself. Lune told him she had been right not to trust him. He asked what she would have done differently. Lune answered that she would never have betrayed anyone, and she would have warned those she cared about that they were about to be erased, telling the truth because of everything they had been through together. Painted Verso asked if she would have chosen her expedition over her own mother. Lune retorted that he always saw things as either or, and that other solutions were possible if only he had trusted them. Painted Verso asked if she would still have pushed his mother out of the canvas, and Lune fell silent. He told her he did not apologize for saving his mother, but that he was sorry for lying, and that he would do all he could to earn back their trust. Lune crossed her arms unconvinced, and said they would see. Later, Sciel and Lune met with Mael. Sciel lightened the mood by complimenting Mael's hair. Mael laughed, while Lune expressed disbelief that there was an entire world she would never know. Mael apologized, and said she would have told them if she had known who she truly was. Lune said it wasn't necessary, and that Mael had lived among them. She was one of them. Mael said it was strange having two sets of childhood memories from two different worlds. Sciel told her she was not an orphan anymore, and asked why she didn't want to be with her real family. Mael replied that she loved her family, and that they, Sciel, Lune, and the others, were her family too, just as Gustave and Emma had been. Lune acknowledged that it was a lot to take in, and Sciel said that, for the first time, she had hope. The three of them then turned in for the night, seeking much-needed rest. The next day, the group began their journey across the continent to collect the chroma from the fallen expeditioners. Mael, now Alicia once again, wielded her new Paintress powers to siphon the trapped chroma from their petrified remains. They traveled from one location to the next, gathering both their stories and the very essence imprisoned in the expeditioners who had come before them. Their path ultimately led them to the dark shores, where Alicia drew forth the last reserves of chroma from them. When she finished, they stood together, gazing across the sea at Lumiere, just visible beyond the haze. They steadied themselves for the task ahead, an army of fallen expeditioners standing ready behind them, prepared to aid them when the time came. They made camp for the night. As Sciel stood in the glow of the fire, Painted Verso approached her. She confessed that while she normally wasn't nervous, this time was different. It wasn't that she never cared about the mission, but this time, everything felt changed. Painted Verso shifted the subject and asked if she had once been a farmer, since she wielded a scythe as a weapon. Sciel laughed at the coincidence, and Verso inquired if double-ended scythes were common on farms. Sciel replied that they made work faster and more efficient. Painted Verso admitted he missed the gardens of Lumiere, though he was sure it was different now. Sciel told them that the variety had increased, thanks to the Outdome teams who brought back new plants, and that was in fact how she had met Pierre. Sciel recounted the story of meeting Pierre, and Painted Verso remarked that she did not speak of him often. Sciel went silent for a moment before Painted Verso apologized. She assured him it was alright, explaining that it still hurt, even after all this time. They had not been perfect, she told him, but they had been perfect for each other. Painted Verso asked what had happened. As Sciel sighed, he quickly told her she didn't have to share if she didn't want to. Sciel decided to tell him about the accident at sea, of how Pierre's body had been lost to the waves, and how though they had prepared for each other's gommage, nothing could have prepared them for death by other means. Painted Verso was left without words, and Sciel explained that she had learned to be grateful for the time they had, rather than angry about what was lost. He told her that was a good way of looking at things, and that not everyone is given such happiness. Sciel, hiding behind her smile, agreed that she was very lucky indeed. Painted Verso then asked if she would like to join him for a swim. Sciel guessed that Sciel had put him up to it, as Sciel had been urging her to learn how to swim. Painted Verso joked that Sciel had called her a bad swimmer, and that he had noticed her discomfort when they traveled over water. He told her that if she learned to swim, she could save him if he ever fell in. They bantered for a while until Sciel finally admitted it was probably a good idea to try. Painted Verso agreed, and handed her a bathing suit he claimed to always have with him, telling her to change and meet him by the lake. Sciel got changed and met him at the water's edge, stating that she did know how to swim, but had always had an aversion to it. Painted Verso joked that he once had an aversion to Minoko, and got over it. Sciel asked him his secret, and he said it was exposure. Avoiding something only made it worse. He revealed that he once tied himself to Minoko for a month, and never left his side, and now they were best friends. Sciel asked if that was supposed to be inspirational, and Painted Verso claimed he had been the swim captain in high school 100 years ago. She asked if swimming with other kids back then was supposed to impress her, and he insisted he was still just as good. Painted Verso became serious for a moment, telling her that swimming was about control, and promised to give her time and space so she could react instead of panic. Sciel, with her usual sarcasm, reluctantly agreed. Painted Verso helped her slowly swim to a nearby island. When they reached it, Sciel was excited to have done it, and Painted Verso joked that she had doubted him. She called him an excellent teacher, and he told her now she needed to swim back. Their playful banter continued as they swam back and got changed once more. Painted Verso then asked how she transitioned from farming to teaching. Sciel asked if it wasn't obvious, prompting Painted Verso to joke that he wasn't as smart as her and needed help. She explained that Pierre had volunteered to teach children sailing and survival at the school, and taking his place at the school helped her grieve by hearing stories from the children. Painted Verso said it made sense, and Sciel reflected that she could understand why his mother did what she did, to feel closer to her real son again. He asked if she would have made a copy of her husband if she could. She answered that knowing what she knew now, probably not, but before all of this, she would have. She admitted how much she missed Pierre, how she needed him to fill the void left behind. She then revealed her tragic past, how she had tried to drown herself, only to be rescued by someone unknown, and how she had lost the unborn child she hadn't even known she was carrying. Sciel admitted she desperately wanted Maëlle to bring Pierre back, but didn't know how she could ever tell him about the child they lost, who would have been 6 years old by now. Painted Verso offered his condolences, and Sciel tried to joke about the story being dark and personal, right? Painted Verso admitted that he, too, had once thought about ending it all, and that it would have solved a lot of problems for everyone if he had. But it was a choice, he said, and Sciel agreed. He then told her the real Verso had painted a creature into the canvas to help those consumed by darkness. Sciel guessed that it was Sciel, and Painted Verso confirmed it. They both smiled at the thought, and then talked a little longer before Sciel left to find Sciel. When she found Sciel, Sciel asked him what he meant by calling her his terrible swimmer friend when they first met. Sciel was confused, saying he hadn't said that. Sciel insisted she remembered it, and Sciel realized she meant the second time they met, in the caves where he lived. Sciel, trying to understand, asked what he meant by second time. Sciel answered cryptically, first means one, second means two. Sciel pressed further, asking if she was swimming the first time they met. Sciel said she was, and then she stopped, and that was dangerous. Finally, Sciel realized it was Sciel who had saved her. She asked how he knew, and he said he had heard her tears and came for her. Sciel, struggling for words, simply thanked him. Sciel noticed her tears and remarked that she liked to cry, and that Painted Verso did too. Sciel smiled, saying she knew, and Sciel laughed as they shared a moment. He asked if she had found who she was looking for. Sciel said no, but hoped she would soon. Sciel said he got sad when he lost his stones, but always found them again, and knew she would too. Sciel laughed and smiled, and told him she was the best. She spent a little more time with him before heading elsewhere for the evening. Later that night, Painted Verso approached Lune. She reflected on how strange it felt to watch Alicia, now wielding the power to remake the world as a paintress, yet still remain Mael as well. Painted Verso smiled, agreeing that despite all that had changed, she was still their Mael. Lune then brought up he had once mentioned traveling with other expeditions. She wondered if he had traveled with Expedition 46. Painted Verso told her he had not, then questioned why she asked. Lune dismissed it at first, prompting Painted Verso to joke about her lack of eloquence, but quickly apologized and encouraged her to continue. Lune revealed that her parents had been members of Expedition 46. Painted Verso explained that while he never traveled with them, he had encountered them in the world, specifically on the other side of Seren's Island. He offered to take her there, but Lune, ever logical, said they had more pressing concerns. Painted Verso assured her the offer would remain if she changed her mind. Eventually, Lune agreed, and the expeditioners made their way to the east of the island, where they stood before a massive door. The door would not open, but Lune sensed something from it, a lingering melody. She summoned her guitar and began to play, and the door responded, opening to allow them passage. Beyond the threshold, a path of bodies and blood lay before them, petrified members of Expedition 46. As they passed the first two, Painted Verso asked if they were her parents. Lune replied that they were friends of her parents, Amelie and Gustave. They continued, passing more fallen until they encountered a giant chromatic glissando and several ballet creatures blocking their way. Bound by determination, Lune and the others fought and defeated the creatures, pressing onward to the end of the path. At the end, they found the expedition commander Amelie and another expeditioner, both lying dead next to their journal. Lune braced herself, picked up the journal, and began to listen. Amelie had recorded that Lune's mother, Brigitte, died from an infection after receiving a wound while fending off the chromatic glissando for 4 days straight. She added that Brigitte seemed peaceful at the end and that Lune could be trusted to finish their work. Lune was left speechless. Painted Verso asked if she was alright, and Lune simply said they should head back to camp. Back at camp, the two stood together in silence for a while until Lune spoke. She reflected that her whole life had been about the Paintress, a constant hum, a worry and responsibility that never left her, not even in sleep. Painted Verso acknowledged the weight she had carried. Lune added that her parents' last words were that she would finish their work. Painted Verso tried to see it in a positive light, suggesting that it meant that they had faith in her. Lune admitted that was one way to see it, but to her, it meant her value was not as a daughter, but as a backup plan for her family's legacy. Painted Verso asked if she truly believed that, and Lune reminded him of their family philosophy. There are no points for effort, only results. He asked why then she continued her parents' work. Lune explained that she still heard their voices, and running from them did not make them quiet. Painted Verso reminded her that her parents were gone, and the voices she heard belonged to her alone. No matter what he told her, she needed to make those voices hers. Lune asked if that strategy worked for him. Painted Verso replied that he was getting there. They shared a smile at that, and Lune surprised him with a kiss on the cheek before they both laughed and returned to the campfire. Later, Painted Verso noticed Lune writing in her journal and tried to guess what she was recording. Lune laughed off his wild assumptions, finally telling him she was writing a song. She confided that her parents always saw music as frivolous, but this time, she was doing something for herself, and their problems could wait until the morning. Painted Verso asked her to play the song, but Lune said she wanted to work on it together. She asked him to stay up and help her with her song. Painted Verso read between the lines and understood her intent. The game offered the choice to pursue this further, and if chosen, he agreed and the two of them left together, Lune finally able to relieve some deeply pent-up frustrations. Afterward, they truly began to compose music together before returning to camp. Sciel, seeing them, smiled knowingly, aware of what had just transpired. The group then settled down for the night to rest, preparing for the final leg of their journey. The next day, they began their journey toward Lumiere, encountering a series of obstacles and revelations that would test their resolve and understanding. Sciel and Lune watched as Alicia, now at Painted Alicia's request, performed the gommage and erased Painted Verso's sister from existence, an act that visibly upset him. Soon after, Painted Clair, whom he believed dead, chose to end herself, seeking release from the suffering inflicted upon her by the real-world Clair. They pressed on, delving into the abyss, where they confronted and defeated an old friend of Painted Verso, Simon, finally releasing him from his torment. Their path led to a newly surfaced, older layer of the canvas, where Sciel and Lune experienced and learned fragments of the real Verso's childhood. When all was said and done, they finally reached Lumiere to confront Alicia's father, Renoir. The group gathered at the dock, Watching as Renoir's creations still roamed the city, Alicia summoned forth the resurrected expeditioners, pointing her sword forward and announcing the attack as the summoned remnants surged through the city, battling Renoir's creations. They pressed through the city, passing the gardens and moving in to confront Renoir himself. Alicia tried to explain to her father what the canvas meant to her, but he insisted that logic must prevail and that their family had suffered enough. He would not allow her mother and Alicia to stay and watch them die. Renoir asked if Alicia truly believed he wanted to lose the last piece of Verso they had left. She pleaded with him not to take this action. He told her that he was doing what he must, that life forces cruel choices. Sciel stepped forward, stating that grief can blind people and lead them to choices that cannot be undone. Renoir turned to her, saying that she only grieved for two. Sciel looked at him calmly and replied that she grieved for many. Lune then stepped forward, telling Renoir that parents make choices that leave lasting marks on their children, and that in the end, their voices must become their own. She told him he could not set boundaries for them. Alicia told her father that after the fire, she could not find joy because Verso had died, and she blamed herself. Renoir assured her that time would heal her pain, but insisted that staying in the canvas was not the right answer. He said that even if her friends spoke truth, the facts remained unchanged, and if she hated him for it, he would pay that price. Renoir said it was his responsibility, since she could not look after herself. Alicia lashed out, accusing them of treating her like a child. Renoir grew angry, insisting he would not allow Verso's death to take her away from him as well. He then calmed himself, saying he had said enough, and the two stood locked in their convictions, unwilling to yield. Alicia drew her sword, and the others followed suit, preparing for battle. Renoir stared at them, his eyes full of disappointment and anger, and struck his cane to the ground, catching them off guard as they were surrounded by his chroma. He stood with his head bowed, until finally he transformed into the curator, now wielding a massive sword with a paintbrush at its end. The group moved forward, steeling themselves for the coming fight. The battle began, and the expeditioners gave everything they had, dodging, parrying, and countering as Renoir argued his side, even while fighting. At last, they landed a powerful blow that nearly defeated him, but then the Axons were summoned behind him, and Seren fully healed him. He told them to stop the madness, to go home. The others struggled to recover. Lune noted that he kept regenerating, and Sciel suggested they might need to destroy the Axons first. Then a portal opened in the sky above, and a massive burst of chroma struck the ground. Eileen emerged from the dust and debris. Renoir warned Eileen it was too soon for her to return to the canvas, and that she would die if she did not leave. Eileen stared in silence before disappearing, only to reappear in the distance, taking the form of the giant Paintress that had once sat at the base of the monolith. She faced Seren, charging an immense amount of chroma in her hand, then unleashed it, striking the Axon's face with devastating force, and continued to fight alongside the others. The expeditioners prepared for the next phase of the battle. As Eileen fought in the background, they struck Renoir with all their strength. Finally, they hit him hard enough to weaken him. Renoir, reaching the end of his patience, flew into the air and declared that the canvas was killing both Alicia and Eileen. Attempting to deliver the final blow, he was intercepted by Alicia, who leapt high and struck him down, pinning him to the ground. Renoir, now visibly weakened from decades of exertion, coughed and struggled to stand. He looked at Eileen, towering in the distance, and recalled how she once saved him from a canvas, how together they had pushed the boundaries of creation in many canvases. Eileen always reminded him there was a price to staying too long, and now, weakened herself, she finally relented and faded from the canvas, returning to the real world. Alicia pleaded with Renoir to trust their mother. He replied he trusted what she had taught him. Alicia told him he felt the need to control the outcome of everything since Verso's death, but that he wasn't saving them either. She said destroying the canvas would only deny them the last piece of Verso they had. Renoir said he had spent 67 years trapped, and that Alicia could not understand why he couldn't let her stay. He opened a portal, revealing Eileen collapsing in the atelier in the real world, saying this was what he faced every day. He would not spend another moment staring at corpses. Sciel tried to comfort painted Verso as he watched his mother suffer. Renoir continued, admitting that Verso's death had broken them all, and he could not lose Alicia too. Alicia replied she felt the same way about this world and those she loved. She did not want to lose her father and only wanted to stay a little longer. Renoir said he wanted to trust her, and Alicia promised he could. At last, Renoir relented, hugging her and telling her that he would leave the light on for her, hoping she would finally find peace. He told them all to hold on to each other as he began to fade from the canvas, surrendering to 67 years of chroma strain. Painted Verso approached the portal, watching his mother suffering, lost in contemplation before moving to the entrance. Lune noticed, reaching out to stop him, calling his name, but he apologized and leapt through. At this point, the canonical story for both Sciel and Lune ends, and the ending that befalls them is determined by the player. As the creators of the game have stated, there is no singular canon ending, and so both fates and both endings await these characters, and it's all up to player interpretation and belief in which one is true. Inside the very heart of the canvas, the player is faced with the ultimate decision: to play as Painted Verso and defeat Mael, or to choose Mael and determine the fate of the canvas for herself and all within it. If the player chooses Mael's path, Painted Verso is defeated. He fades from existence, and Mael is left to decide the fate of the painted world. Time passes, and the canvas world, along with Lumiere, is restored to its state before Grimoire's attack. Within the opera house, Sciel sits beside her husband Pierre. She speaks to Lune, who is seated next to her. Lune glances over her shoulder and sees Alicia standing nearby, accompanied by a young boy. Lune waves them over. Sciel says something quietly to Pierre as Alicia and the boy arrive. Lune greets the child with warmth, and they all take their seats together. Lune converses with the boy, and he smiles, nodding in response before she sits back. Sciel smiles as she watches Gustave and Sophie join Alicia, taking their places beside her. Alicia's gaze is fixed intently on the stage as the lights dim, and an aging Painted Verso stepped out into the spotlight. He stands in silence for a long moment, gathering his thoughts before taking his seat at the piano, his hands hovering above the keys. Sciel turns her head, her expression blank yet peaceful, while Lune watches with the same subtle smile, neither portraying concern for Painted Verso's long pause, both simply waiting for him to begin. Alicia's eyes reflect the weight of the real world, her will urging Painted Verso to move forward. Finally, he begins to play, and the scene closes. The implication's clear. Lune and Sciel have found everything they longed for, and in this restored world, they live what appears to be a happy life. If, instead, the player chooses Painted Verso, Alicia falls to the ground defeated. She pleads with him not to do this, but then fades from the canvas. The portal, the heart of the canvas, is where the last remnant of Verso's soul paints. Painted beings cannot survive in that space. After Alicia's defeat, Sciel witnesses Minoko and Esquier enter, and after giving Painted Verso a final embrace, begin to fade away. Sciel understands immediately what this means. She and Lune are now the only two humans left in the canvas. Sciel chooses to return to her family, stepping into the portal at the heart of the canvas. Painted Verso turns to see her standing there. At first, Sciel's expression is one of disappointment, as she begins to fade from existence. She walks slowly toward him, almost as if she wants him to feel the consequences of his actions. He reaches out, trying to apologize, but she stops his hand, denying him that chance. Though Alicia is gone, and Pierre cannot be brought back, Sciel relents. She manages a brief, bittersweet smile, and chooses to join him in death, rather than continue alone. Lune observes this from the mouth of the portal, her gaze fixed on Painted Verso with defiance and absolute hatred. Now alone in a dark canvas world, Lune clings to the creed. When one falls, we continue. She does not blink, never breaking eye contact, refusing to give in and fade as Sciel did, nor to surrender as Painted Verso wishes. She sits on the floor, unwavering, her defiant presence a testament to her refusal to yield. Painted Verso takes Verso's soul with him as he walks away from the painting, erasing himself from existence, his soul finally at rest. Lune remains, alone in an empty world, her fate uncertain. The canvas may be erased, or perhaps she continues to exist, wandering in the darkness. The story ends with no canon resolution, leaving her ultimate fate unwritten. Sciel stands as a testament to quiet resilience and the enduring strength found in the ordinary. Born into a world governed by cycles of loss and renewal, she was shaped by the soil, the seasons, and the unspoken wisdom of her father, who taught her to whisper her burdens to the stars. Her journey, from farmer to teacher, to legend among the gestrels and expeditioners, was never driven by glory, but by a steadfast belief in the value of every life she touched. Tragedy marked her path, the loss of her beloved Pierre, the shattering realization of her own vulnerability, and the pain of a child lost before knowing life. Yet in each moment of sorrow, Sciel chose to endure, to reach for meaning in the time she was given. She learned to wield the same scythe that harvested crops as a weapon, embracing the inevitability of life and death. Her compassion became her armor, her humility, and her strength. Sciel's laughter, her willingness to dance and celebrate even in the shadow of doom, and her unwavering support for those around her, made her the heart of every gathering. a quiet anchor in a world so often adrift. In the end, Sciel was not defined by her battles or her victories, but by her ability to accept fate with grace, to forge bonds across boundaries, and to hold fast to hope even as the world unraveled. She is the embodiment of endurance, of finding light in darkness, and of choosing love, memory, and kindness in a world that offered her little certainty, but much to endure. Lune is the living embodiment of intellect forged in fire, driven by duty, haunted by legacy, and tempered by the unyielding pursuit of truth. Born under the oppressive expectations of her obsessive parents, she was molded into a prodigy and an apprentice before she could be a child. Her life became a relentless quest for answers, to the mysteries of the Paintress, to the secrets of the world, and to the meaning of her own existence. Marked by the philosophy that there are no points for effort, only results, Lune internalized the burdens of responsibility, logic, and survival. She became an elemental artist, a researcher, and a strategist, but beneath her stoic exterior lingered the ache of a musician's heart and the sorrow of a daughter who was never allowed to simply be. Her relationships with her siblings, with Gustave, with Sciel, were shaped by both her guardedness and her need for connection, a conflict she would struggle with until the end. When confronted with loss and betrayal, Lune never surrendered to despair. Instead, she pressed forward, questioning, analyzing, and refusing to let fate dictate the boundaries of her life or the legacy of those she loved. She was relentless in her pursuit of answers, but learned, through pain and companionship, that hope and human connection were not distractions, but necessities. Lune's journey is one of transformation. From the tool of others' ambitions to the architect of her own destiny, she is defined by her refusal to yield, her devotion to the creed, when one falls, we continue, and her unwavering will to endure, to question, and ultimately to choose her own voice in a world shaped by silence and sorrow. And that is Sciel and Lune, a farmer who learned to whisper her pain to the stars and became the quiet cornerstone of every life she touched, a prodigy raised in the shadow of impossible expectations who turned logic and loss into the only tools she could trust. Two women who survived everything the world could throw at them: loss, love, betrayal, and the relentless pressure to keep moving forward, no matter what was lost along the way. They are not heroes in the way legends are written, but their endurance, their willingness to hold the line for others, and their refusal to let the world decide what hope is supposed to look like, those are the qualities that echo long after the story ends. Their stories are layered, incomplete, and in many places, deeply human. They remind us that the heart of the world is not found only in its monuments or its tragedies, but in the choices made quietly, day after day, by the people standing just outside the spotlight. But as always in Clair Obscur, their journey is only a part of the tapestry, because for every expedition, every battle, and every sacrifice, there are others whose stories twist through time and space in ways we are only beginning to understand. Next time, on Video Game Lore, we'll turn our focus to Minoko, Sciel, and the mysteries of time dilation within the canvas world itself. We'll dig into the journals, the environmental clues, and the mechanics of a universe where time itself may not be what it seems, and where even the strangest characters have truths worth uncovering. If this story resonated with you, if you found something of yourself in Sciel or Lune, or if you have your own interpretations or questions, let me know in the comments. This channel exists because of the community that is willing to look deeper, ask harder questions, and share what they find. This has been Vigil, and this is Video Game Lore, and I'll see you in the next one.